Good afternoon, everyone. We're going to get started in just a few minutes. I was going to ask you to find your seats, but everybody has already found their seats. But we're still going to wait until our 1 o'clock start time to gavel in, okay? Thank you. Okay, everyone, I'm showing 1 o'clock. Let's get started. Greg, I want to ask you to gavel us in, sir.
All right, sir.
Real quickly, before we launch into anything, I want to remind each other of who we are very quickly. We'll just go around the room and do a real brief introduction. Name, title of the board, board member, whatever it may be. We'll start here with Greg and Charles, and they'll show us how it's done, and we'll just keep going around.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Greg Murray, and I have the honor of being the chair of the CAB.
I'm Charles Hilton, Vice Chair of the CAB.
I'm Kim Ray, CAB member.
Steve Riley, CAB member.
Candace Cave, Waste Management Chair.
A.K. Hassan, Vice Chair of Waste Management.
Jim Gill, Chairman, Nuclear Materials.
Jerry Mossbarger, Vice Chair, Nuclear Materials.
Michelle Bush, CAB member.
Hi, I'm Grace Ann Martin with South Carolina DHEC, and I'm the ESOP representative.
Good afternoon. I'm Susan Fulmer with DHEC, and I'm the FFA manager.
John Richards, the EPA Region 4. I'm EPA project manager.
Jimmy Mcmillan, the acting deputy commander of Security Riverside.
Amy Boyette, I'm the director of the Office of External Affairs at Savannah River, and I'm also the deputy designated federal official for the CAB.
Got it right in one. Tim?
Ken Sajuan, professor at Savannah State University, CAB member.
Ronna O'Brien, CAB member.
Phyllis Brett, chairman of the Facilities Disposition and Site Remediation Committee.
none other than a CAB member and vice chair for the FDSR committee.
Bobby Williams, Chair of Administrative and Outreach Committee.
And Delisa Carrico does have a microphone. She's our federal coordinator for today. And I'm James Tanner, your facilitator. Greg, we'll get started with your update, and then we'll move on down the rest of our agenda items.
All righty, thank you, everybody. Greetings, CAB colleagues. It's great to see you here in wonderful Savannah. I look forward to working with you over the today and tomorrow, actually, on the important issues that we have scheduled. Greetings and thank you to DOE and the agency teams that are here. We appreciate the time you spend with us and the knowledge that you share with us. As y'all know, we have a full agenda. We have 2 recommendations to vote on, one regarding plutonium disposition and how that will help us avoid substantial financial liabilities, and another regarding promoting the preservation of the scientific legacy of SRS. And we have a number of presentations on key liquid waste operations at SRS, including the H Canyon spent nuclear fuel process, the salt waste processing facility, I started to use the acronyms, the Defense Waste Processing Facility, and saltstone processing. Among other things, we also have a guest presenter from New Mexico who's going to update us on what's happening at WIP, the Waste Isolation Pilot Plant, the final disposition location for a lot of the SRS waste. As well, we have the long-awaited presentation on ABD, the Accelerated Basin De-Inventory Initiative, if I could say it, that we were teased on a couple of meetings ago and will finally receive. Thanks, James and CAB team, for putting together such a meaningful agenda for us. We should focus on problems that are important, that are needing attention, and that are manageable. And I think that's what we're doing. I focus in particular on issues regarding reducing risk, reducing cost, and facilitating mission completion. Before we start all this, though, I'd like to ask Charles Hilton, our Vice Chair, to update you on what happened at the National Chairs meeting in Santa Fe that he and I attended about 3 weeks ago. Charles?
Thank you, Chairman. And thank you, CAB, for allowing us to go to Los Alamos to represent you. It was a fruitful meeting. I'd like to talk about Los Alamos a little bit to start with, and then we'll talk about the meeting itself. If you want to go to a place that's in the middle of nowhere, I would strongly recommend you go to Los Alamos. From my understanding and what was told us, Robert Oppenheimer, who was one of the leading nuclear scientists that led to the creation of the first atomic weapons, he had camped there as a child. And when they were looking for a secure site to build a national lab, he spoke up and he said, "I know just the place." And it's just the place. It's in the middle of nowhere, and it's what you imagine the West to be. It's mesas and canyons. It's an elevation of 7,300 feet. So for boys from the South, it's elevations of 500 feet. Air was a little short, but we enjoyed the tour. One thing that I'm always interested in as I look at these sites is how does it compare to Savannah River site? And one thing that I'm always curious about is size. Los Alamos is 22,200 acres or 34.69 square miles. How does that compare to Savannah River site? Savannah River site is 198,000 acres and 310 square miles. Sometimes you don't get a realization of how large Savannah River site was in the nuclear program. It's huge. And so the problems associated with environmental management are also huge. You have a much larger site. The legacy waste there in many ways is much like SRS. It's waste that we see in any industrial site from the 50s that has a nuclear component to it. One of the things that they were really concerned about there is hexavalent chromium. And since I was a regulated water system, I'm very familiar with hexavalent chromium. We dealt with this 20 years ago in South Carolina. It's a huge problem out there. It came from production. They've been able to stop the plume from moving, and it's actually retreating, doing much that we're doing at Savannah River site. pumping it out and stripping it and putting it back in the ground through a process of reverse osmosis. And so most of the waste we heard out there were the same that we've heard at Savannah Riverside. We talked about true waste. Greg had mentioned earlier that he was fascinated that they had taken old grout and cement and put it in corrugated metal pipes. At least it contained it as it dried, and they buried it. Well, now, 50 years later, it needs to go to WIP. And they're actually digging these pipes up and having to cut them to fit them into TruPack containers and shipping them on. So it was a fascinating process to see. But many of the problems that we saw out there in the environmental management portion were the same exact things that we've seen at SRS. One interesting problem that we don't see at Savannah Riverside so much that they have is they are built in the middle of the Pueblo Nation. They're surrounded by Native Americans. And they try to maintain a strong working relationship with the tribal people. And it seemed that DOE is to be commended in their efforts to reach out to the Pueblo people as they start these cleanup processes and as they work on lands immediately adjacent. Michael Mcmillan, who was here at our CAB years ago, is now their EM director, and he actually arranged a tour for us to go on one of the old settlement sections that the Pueblos had. This settlement dated back from 1350 to 1650. And they said that as we go onto the site, you know, we would see artifacts from the settlement. We were welcome to pick them up, look at them, but put them back. And I said, yeah, you know, I'm somewhat of skepticist. And I said, we'll probably see one piece and it'll be planted for us to walk around and see. It was amazing. If I had been pushing a wheelbarrow, I think I could have filled it half full with artifacts. They were everywhere. They went into the culture of the people, and I was quite fascinated with that. And they also discussed, I asked the question very bluntly, were they able to pass the culture on to their children? That's a big thing with me and, you know, our legacy to pass it on. And they said they're surprisingly successful. Most of their children stay and maintain the culture. The last night that we were there, they actually catered a dinner for us, and it was catered by Native Americans, and they concluded that dinner with dances from Native American dances by the children, and it's quite fascinating to watch. So we had a much better appreciation, but I thought that's one thing that Savannah Riverside doesn't have to deal with, is maintaining those relationships. As far as the meeting details, we had several of the same things that we see here, but there was comments on legacy management. Those questions have come up more at the chairs and vice chairs meetings simply because some sites are much further along in the process of closing up. You know, most of the site work has been done of cleaning up, so what now? Well, there is a whole separate division of DOE that's legacy management, and these sites will have to be maintained for years, if not centuries, as they're closed to make sure that they're maintained and they're meeting the standards of both the state governments and the feds. So they got into those programs. They had an update on contracting. I'm not sure, I might have had a little bit more information that I needed on the contracting process, but this is our federal government, and there's layers of bureaucracy, and they explained some of the layers, much more so than possibly I needed to know. They talked about packaging and transporting of this waste. We've had some presentations here on that, of how this stuff has to be handled, the concerns that as it goes, it leaves South Carolina, I forgot how many states it hits before it gets to WIP, but that whole process, the what's involved in driving the trucks, what's involved in the permitting, what's involved from the WIP standpoint, which we're going to learn more about, of just getting this stuff approved to take out to the WIP site. I skipped over one of the early presentations because I kind of wanted to conclude in this. I've had 4 presentations on the Justice 40 initiative. And I've struggled with how does that apply to what I do sitting on this board. Our job is to make recommendations concerning environmental management at the Savannah River site. And the Justice 40 program is that 40% of certain federal investments flow to disadvantaged communities that are marginalized, underserved, and overburdened by pollution, which is obviously a good program we need to clean up. My position on this has always been we need to stop the pollution at the site before we let it get off the site, and then we go to the communities where it's already gotten. We know it's in Burke County. We know it's come all the way down the Savannah River to Savannah, Beaufort County. We need to address those problems, but first we've got to address it at the site of origin. And so I finally just bluntly asked the question, if I write a recommendation, how do I look at this program and incorporate it in a recommendation that I write? And I was basically told you don't. You're doing what you're supposed to be doing. So I actually felt better. I thought I had a huge disconnect between what was being presented in this outreach program. The end goal is good. The end goal is good to clean up these communities. But I thought I was missing something, and I was finally told that we're okay. So it was a good meeting. We had a chairs round table at the end where the chairs and the vice chairs just brought up problems, brought up concerns, and we just laid it on the table. And it's interesting that many of the concerns are the same across the country, and it's new things are brought up also there. I would be remiss if I didn't thank our staff. We had a full staff supporting us. We don't know the answers when these issues come up about site-specific things. We may have heard a presentation, but what Savannah River site does is complex, and we don't always remember nor understand. And when you got these people behind, James, Heather, Delisa, Amy, all of these people are sitting right there. The only thing you got to do is drop a text or just look over your shoulder, and your phone lights up in just a second with the answers that you need. And so thank you to you folks for supporting us, and thank you, CAB, for allowing Greg and I to go and represent you. It's an honor to do this. We try to speak out on your behalf and represent the concerns that you've expressed at these tables. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Charles, and I agree. Thank you, everybody, for the support. The CAB team is awesome. I said there that we have the best CAB team, and I believe that. So anyhow, thank you, and thank you, Charles, for that rundown of what happened. Last thing, after the meeting today, I hope you'll attend the Administration Outreach Committee meeting. We have proposed recommendations on subcommittee membership and meeting times. Now, both of these touch on core issues of public outreach and engagement for the CAB, so these are really important. If you're available and can make that at 5, I guess it'll be right after the meeting, a few minutes after that, then I hope you'll come, and Bobby will touch on some of what's going on with that. Otherwise, thank you all for this meeting. Have a great meeting. If I can do anything for you, let me know. James, I'll turn it back to you.
Thanks, you gentlemen. Checks in the mail. I actually have a performance evaluation coming up, so I'm just going to append your section of the meeting minutes to that. I appreciate it. Thank you. So we do have an interesting agenda coming up today. We're going to go through the various committees, get some brief updates from everybody, see what they worked on in the past month, see if there's anything that there's some lingering questions about that we want to cover. After that, we're scheduled for a short break. Well, before we even do that, we've got our agency updates, so DOE, EPA, South Carolina DHEC. We'll take a short break after all that, depending on how we feel, and then we'll launch into our presentations today. We've got one on assessments. It's Assessments 101, basically. That stems out of a series of questions that Jim asked, so you should be seeing a lot of answers to some of the questions that you had come up. After that, we'll be talking about our infrastructure overview, some of the things going on at Savannah River site with the broader site services infrastructure, so I hope you're ready for that. After that, we'll do some discussion on board business. We've got a couple of draft recommendations to tackle, and then we've got public comments scheduled. And I want you to take note of that scheduling, how we break that on the agenda. We do our discussion of our recommendations, and then we give the public a chance, after they've heard your discussion, to provide their feedback, their input based off of how you talked about a recommendation. We schedule it this way on purpose. And then tomorrow, you'll notice our public comment section will be right there before you take a vote for the exact same reason, so that they can talk to you again and try to make their feelings known on the recommendations. And you've got a better basis for how the community feels, for how you can vote and represent the broader community. And we do that on purpose. Any questions about the agenda either today or tomorrow that we need to address before we get rocking and rolling? Any questions for Greg and Charles about their time in Santa Fe? I assure you they did not embarrass you at all. Okay, seeing nothing. Let's go down the list, and we'll start with the Department of Energy. Matt Mcmillan, you'll be giving the update today, sir.
All right, thank you, appreciate it. First of all, I'm sure Mike Button would love to be here, but he got stuck in an airplane somewhere, so I'm your suitable substitute. First of all, we'll start with the budget, and as you know, our budget at SRS for the environmental management portion is about $1.75 billion. Of course, the total budget is $3 billion. That includes NNSA. The FY23 President's budget request for SRS is $1.72 billion, and the FY24 budget for SRS is currently being developed. In mid-August, as an update, we met with the Aiken County and the Barnesville County in South Carolina to bring them updates on our budget and our budget processes. Both was well attended, and they appreciated it, and had a lot of participation from local council members and the Barnesville County representatives. And the Barnesville County representatives asked for a tour of the site, and we have already done that, and that was much appreciated by them as well. Okay, we'll start with the contracts. Contracts at the site, as Mike has told you before, we announced the award of the contract for the security contract last year, but we had a protest filed, and DOE determined it was appropriate to take appropriate corrective actions. We're still in the process of doing that, and we'll notify the officers when that corrective action is completed. And we intend to issue a 2-year extension to that contract as it stands today. And when we get more information, we'll update you on that as well. Regarding the Savannah River Management M&O acquisitions, those negotiations are completed. You know that contract expires September 30th. And the intent there is to, notice the intent was to extend the contract for 4 years with 1 option year. We finalized those details, and new contract should be signed sometime this week, because September 30th is approaching fast. As far as Advanced Manufacturing Collaborative is concerned, final design is complete. The county permit is given us, site preparation work has been issued for that permit, and the building permit is under review by the county. And so we're responding to those comments. Of course, the inflation and supply chain issues have required additional attention from both DOE and Northwind, so we're looking at those things for sure. But as it stands right now, there is no impact on the completion of the project, still scheduled for calendar year 2024. Now I move to the specific operational processes and achievements at the site, beginning with L area. We continue to receive spent nuclear fuel shipments from both domestic and foreign research reactors. And we completed a major roof renovation in L area this year as well, in the L Basin roof to be exact, for about $2.3 million. H-Cane, we're just preparing for steam outage next month before resuming processing in late October. In the K area, we're making progress toward our plans to initiate WIP shipments from K area sometime late this calendar year. Building 235, completed the last phase of that facility deactivation activities earlier this month. It's now cold and dark, and we expect to initiate decommission activities early calendar year 2023. For liquid waste, salt waste processing facility, we processed 1.5 million gallons so far in FY22 and over 3.5 million gallons to date. And we are more than the salt stone production facility with more than 2.6 million FY22 to date of decontaminated salt solution. So we're making progress there. We've continued to, in SDUs, we're continuing to construct the big mega-sized SDU containers to store decontaminated salt solution from the salt waste processing facility. And the remaining 3 SDUs, SDUs 10 through 12, needed to complete the tank closure mission at SRS and have all received approval to start the construction. Okay, the grouting for F Tank Farm diversion boxes 5 and 6. The grouting for F Tank Farm diversion box was completed in January of this year. This is a significant step toward operational closure of the first high-level liquid waste facilities at SRS since 2016. Entombment design of both diversion boxes are also complete, and operational closure activities are expected to be completed by December of this year, meeting the federal facilities agreement commitment. For soil and water and cleanup and infrastructure regulatory is concerned, we received notification from the DOE headquarters that our Fido remediation project was selected to receive a 2022 DOE Sustainability Award in Innovative Approach to Sustainability category. And just a quick note, the Fido remediation project is an effective low-energy corrective action that collects and remediates and contaminated groundwater by irrigating into the nearby pine trees where it's trans-evaporated into the atmosphere. So we're very proud of that significant achievement. And more importantly, this project saves us approximately $8 million in cost savings when you compare it to traditional remedial approaches. As far as D&D is concerned, in D area, our coal handling facilities are coming down, and we safely dismantled 2 sections of the conveyor system that carried coal to the powerhouse. The last section of the conveyor is underground in a very robust, reinforced concrete tunnel, and it will be demolished and removed in the next few weeks. DOE held a United States and United Kingdom technology exchange with countries of the United Kingdom and Canada to share our innovative cleanup technologies through presentation provided by subject matter experts. That went very well, so we'll see what comes out of that. And as far as the lab is concerned, the lab's still doing its great usual work. However, it kind of piggybacks on the Justice 40 initiative to some degree, but not totally tied to it. The Minority Serving Institutions Partnership Program, the lab is engaged in that with historically black colleges and universities and other minority serving institutions, helping meet EM's liabilities for completing its cleanup objectives and building a workforce for the future. We'll take any questions that you may have after that update.
All right, any questions from around the table? Narendra, we'll start with you.
Narendra Malik, thank you for the wonderful presentation. We just mentioned about the minority participation in the subcontracting. Could you give a little bit more information? What percentage they are involved in? What kind of field they are working? Are they working in the scientific field or just doing logistics?
Make sure I understand the question. The municipal program it's kind of a newer program as far as concerned. This is a program whereby we're trying to approach the minority colleges and universities and recruit students from there to work at the lab or participate in lab projects. That's the main focus, as I understand it.
Thank you.
Charles.
You mentioned in the salt waste processing facility, we had 1.5 million gallons for fiscal year 22. Does fiscal year 22 end in September or October? I'm sorry, I should know that.
October 1st.
October 1st?
It's been 30th, okay. Begins October 1st, yeah.
I know we had a shutdown this fiscal year. Are all those problems worked out and we're at production levels that you were hoping for now?
Maybe defer tomorrow to Jim, to the assistant managers here who works in those details.
Okay.
This is Jim Folk. We'll be here tomorrow.
Jim will be here tomorrow, and we'll get you a super detailed answer to that. Any other questions from, yeah, Amy?
I just wanted to add something on the question that Narinder asks. So the MSIP program, the Minority Serving Institution Program, has been run out of the Savannah River National Lab for a number of years. It's had a relatively small budget, and they work with colleges and universities actually around the country. There's, I think, 6 schools that are engaged in that. And what has made this big difference, and what Mac was talking about, is this year in the president's budget, we got $56 million for that program. It got a huge boost. And so we are, the program is going to be getting a lot more attention. It's going to be doing a lot more. But yeah, we can provide more information on that, maybe do even a separate presentation on that for you guys at some point if you like. But it does include several schools in South Carolina and several others too. So.
Yeah, go ahead.
Continue following that. It's good that colleges are getting some DOE grant. When the students get training, do they come back and work for SRS?
Well, and it's not necessarily SRS. I mean, it could be, what we hope for is any DOE or DOE contractor. And we're talking about that right now. How do you measure success? So if these students get a job somewhere else, maybe at Plant Vogel or somewhere like that, I think we still consider a success. For the student, it certainly is. So we're talking about what those metrics would be and all of those things right now. So we'll see.
But the hope is they would choose Savannah River.
Well,
Is available.
if Nicole Nelson-Shawn is listening right now, I want to make sure she knows. We support them wherever they go in the complex.
Exactly.
All right. AK?
Yes. AK Hassan CAB. Yes, Mac, you mentioned that about building the workforce for the future. And of course, we were discussing earlier about many of the missions that we have currently ongoing at Savannah River site are, targeted for being closed out. So what, if anything, that you can discuss in terms of would these be new missions or just trying to, I guess, maximize skill level for the current missions that we have ongoing when you start talking about building for the future?
The latter.
Okay.
Maximizing the current missions that we have ongoing, and if the future missions happen out there, then they will be available for them to support that as well.
And we'll come around to Kim.
Kim Ray, CAB. I just wanted to follow up on Narenda's question, and this is more a comment, but I do have some direct experience with the programs. My stepdaughter was a student at South Carolina State University. She was seeking a degree in industrial engineering, and she was fortunate enough to get an internship with NASA. And as a result of her internship, she was also a ROTC scholarship recipient. She, of course, had to go into the Army immediately after she graduated, but she is currently now a lieutenant colonel in the U.S. Army. She went on after she came off of her active duty stint. She's still in the reserves, and she is now a federal contracting officer. So at least in our family's experience, these students do continue on and have some contact with the federal government even after they graduate.
I think we'd all be hard-pressed to categorize that as anything other than success. That sounds really good. Thank you. Any other questions around the table for Department of Energy? No? All right. John, you ready, sir? EPA.
John Richards again, on FFA, Project Manager of Savannah Riverside. And not too much, but we have been very busy this summer working with South Carolina counterparts and Department of Energy and their contractors on on the new high-level waste tank agreements that will look ahead for the closure of all the tanks, and much success that we hope to see. So we're in the middle of those negotiations, and hopefully we'll be finalizing that very soon. That's our hope. Yeah, especially in light of the salt waste processing facility, which I know there'll be more about that tomorrow, but that seems like that's going along well. I do have one of my new colleagues that I mentioned. I don't think she's here yet. She was coming in late today on the flight. Jana Dawson, she was one of our contractors for many years working on Savannah River. Now she's one of our project managers, co-lead with Rob Pope on all of our tank stuff, so she's heavily involved in the negotiations as well. And she also works with me at Oak Ridge on other projects. So again, she'll be here all day tomorrow as well, so hopefully she'll get to know some of you and hear some of the talks. I don't think I have too much more, but it was good to hear about the 235. That's always been one of our priorities, and we'll get budget prioritizing for EPA. South Carolina 235 is usually one of the top of our list, so I'm glad to see that's getting going again early 23, finishing that. So thank you.
Any questions for EPA? Looking around the table, any questions for EPA? No? Okay. Thank you, John. Much appreciated. Susan, DHEC?
Good afternoon, Susan Fulmer. I've got a couple of agency updates for you. So in early September, our DHEC's board approved several key operational changes to our current organizational structure. And those changes are aimed at improving customer service and delivery. So just wanted to tell you about a few of those that might be of interest to you. They're combining the environmental affairs, which is where our group is housed. They're combining EA and healthcare quality functions that are related to radiologic services, and that includes radiological health, radiological waste, and those will reside in our environmental affairs side of the agency. Also combining the environmental affairs and public health rabies functions, and those will reside in public health. They're currently in environmental affairs, but they'll move to public health. And also vector control is going to move over to the public health side. The food and dairy programs are going to move from environmental affairs to public health, and also the lead assessments will move over there. And we'll be creating a cross-agency disaster response leadership team. Of course, we already have a disaster response team in place, but this will be at the leadership level. And then we'll be reviewing various avenues for interacting with our customers with a focus on improving customer service and stakeholder engagement. Also this month, our agency released the 2022 to 2024 Bridge Strategic Plan. And this plan maps our agency's strategic path forward for fulfilling its mission of promoting and protecting the health of the public and the environment in a post-COVID-19 pandemic era. So the plan is shorter than a typical strategic plan would be, and this is intentional to allow us time to critically evaluate and strengthen our workforce, infrastructure, processes, and partnerships as we bridge from our pandemic response into the future. The plan takes into consideration critical need for our agency and its staff to keep pace with changes to federal and state requirements, growth in our scientific knowledge, and the evolving needs of all South Carolinians. This plan will be released on our website soon, so if you're interested, please, I encourage you to get online at DHEC's website and check it out. And then I just wanted to mention the liquid waste negotiations John mentioned earlier as well, that we've been going through, having a lot of good discussion with EPA, DOE, and SRMC, the contractor, in our negotiations. We've made a lot of progress with it, but we still have a little bit of work to do. We hope that we'll be finished up in the next month or two, and then I'm sure you'll be hearing a lot at the CAB meetings when we get those negotiations finalized. Any questions for me?
Questions or comments for DHEC? Jim?
Yeah, hi. Didn't hear anything about COVID. Is there any updates you can share with us, or what is DHEC seeing these days?
So, we're treating it more in the endemic phase now. We encourage you to get online and check out your community's level. You can look, if you go on our website, it will reference you to the CDC page, and then you can look at it by county and see if you're at a low, medium, or high level. We're, encouraging vaccinations if you haven't gotten, or boosters if you're eligible for a booster, and just taking the precautions that we've been hearing about for several years with masking, washing hands, keeping distance, staying home if you're sick. But, we've kind of shifted phase now from pandemic to endemic phase with COVID.
Okay. Charles?
I'm always amazed at DHEC reorganizations after having worked with the organization all my life. I think I heard you say that the lead program is moving to public health.
Public health.
For those that were in the old wastewater program, lead regulations, is that moving out of their jurisdiction?
I'm not sure that is. This is, I think, more related to blood level lead assessments.
Okay. Like I say, I'm always fascinated with y'all's gyrations up there.
Any other questions from around the table? Okay. Thank you, folks. Thank you, Susan. Coming up next, we're going to go around to our committees. We're going to have very brief updates from everybody. They'll give our chairs the opportunity to talk about what they've been working on and give you the opportunity to ask any questions that you feel you may need. We'll start with the Administrative and Outreach Committee. Bobby?
Bobby Williams, CAB. Good afternoon and welcome to Savannah. The CAB A&O Committee has been working on three draft recommendations. One is subcommittee meeting times. The other is CAB input into new CAB member selection process. And our third one is, I got to put my glasses on, I can't see. Non-CAB members serving on the CAB. And these are going to be discussed further in our A&O meeting that's going to be held right after this meeting this afternoon. Hopefully you will attend, you will hear more about these draft recommendations. Also, the CAB will be have a presentation at the TREAT workshop, which is going to be held in Barnwell next month from October 12th through 14th. And if you wonder what TREAT is, it's the acronyms for Teaching Radiation, Energy, and Technology for the community. And I will be doing a presentation on October 13th. That's all I have. Do you have any questions for the A&O committee?
Kim? Go ahead, Kim.
I was just going to add, where is that treat?
It's in Barnwell at Ned Branch Baptist Church. But it's a closed meeting, yes.
Any other questions? And the Administrative and Outreach meeting that's happening after this one will be in the room on the other side of what they call an air wall. So just through that wall over there is where we'll be meeting. Okay. Thank you, Bobby. Much appreciated.
Thank you.
All right. I'm looking at the clock. I know we've got 3 more updates to do real quick, but I'm going to go ahead and take your temperature now. So do we want to go through these and do we want to take a break, or do we want to go through these and then have our first presentation and then take a break? What do y'all want to do?
Do these, take a break.
Presentation and then break? Yeah? Okay. In that case, I want to ask our first presenter, Mr. Gutierrez, if you can head up over here. We'll get you mic'd up and get you ready to go. Before we go further, our next step actually is going to be facilities. And Phyllis, I'll let you go ahead. See if you have an update. If it's green, you're on.
Phyllis Britt, CAB. About the only thing I have is we had a recommendation that we made. Greg was the lead on it, and it has been approved. Greg, would you like to talk about that?
Sure, thank you. Thank you, Phyllis. Yeah, we had passed a recommendation regarding how buildings are shut down, the process that's used, in particular regarding in essence, the permitting process. And there was a suggestion to do it in a way that had been done with 235F, which was a complicated shutdown, and it seemed to work really well, and we thought it might make sense to encourage DOE to continue to do that with other appropriate buildings. It came back, as I recall, the DOE accepted the recommendation, so it's up to us to decide to debate that and then decide to close it or not.
Thank you.
Any questions for FDSR? All right, we'll move over to nuclear materials. Jim?
Jim Gill. We have a couple things going on, one of which is a recommendation that is in your package that we will be discussing and voting on at this board meeting. In addition to that, the next major event of importance is a presentation on the L Basin de-inventorying process, which is something that we've been kicking around. You may remember the presentation was pulled originally. It was supposed to be in one of the first board meetings. But we're back on track and looking forward to the information on that. And that's it.
Any questions for nuclear materials? Seeing none. Candace, waste management. I know you don't have very much.
Candace CAB. We had a bit of a hiccup at our committee meeting, so we don't have any new information to report.
But we're going to have a blast next month.
We are.
All right. Any questions for any of our committee, our subcommittee chairs? Seeing none. Let's move into our presentations. We'll start with this next one, and then we'll go right into a break after that. Mr. Gutierrez, if you'd like to come up, this is the assessments 101. Like I said, Jim, this one was based off the number of questions that you had asked, so I hope this is going to hit the mark of what you were looking for.
All right, good afternoon, everybody. I am Dr. Brent Gutierrez. I've been at Savannah River site now for 35 years. I originally started out at headquarters, came down on the detail back in '88 and never left. So today I want to give you an overview of our assessment process. So I got three areas I really wanted to cover: our planning process, how we actually do the assessments, and then how they all tie together into our issues management system. There we go. So we have two primary drivers for our assessment process. First one is Order 2261B, implementation of our oversight policy across the department. Second one is our QA order 4141D. And then we have three additional orders that are not directly on oversight process. They deal with our federal technical capabilities, personnel selection for training and qualification in new facilities, and our maintenance management program, and then a guide on how to do the oversight. All these last three orders all contain requirements here and there for federal people to do certain oversight activities, in addition to what the program itself has. So that's why they're listed as additional drivers. So each year we plan our assessments, or we prepare our assessments in two levels. One is at a site level, and that's our annual performance assurance plan. This is a rather short document, tops maybe 2 pages, and it contains an overview of the types of assessments we want to do. And it largely contains a list of our safety management programs that we need to assess every year or on certain frequencies. And then it may outline specific assessments that the site manager would deem and assistant managers would deem we need to go do. So it's a very high-level document. The one with all the details is our annual assessment plan. Again, it's fiscal year based, and this plan is done at the organizational level, okay? So let me just back up and go, and I really covered this slide, but I'll just touch on a couple of things. Again, the annual performance assurance plan is an annual plan, okay? It is approved at the site level, so it goes through MAC and it goes through Mr. Budney for approval. In my office, I'm the director of the Performance Assurance Division within Office of Safety and Quality Assurance. So my division is responsible for generating these every year, and we coordinate the review and content of that amongst our fellow organizations, for example, Jim Folt or Steve Stamper's organization and Nuke Materials, Safeguard and Security, everyone. We will then pull that together, get it out for review and concurrence, and ultimately get it to Mr. Budney for approval. Now, I want to spend a little bit of time on this one. Each organization, once we get the annual performance plan approved, each organization will then commence to fleshing out or building up their annual performance plan. Each organization has subject matter experts, facility reps, facility engineers, et cetera. And they're all focused on a given line of business. And so given the APAP for the year, and given, let's say, past history with the performance of the contractor or known issues that need to be addressed, the SMEs in that line organization will then sit down and lay out in detail what they're going to assess for the year. These plans include evaluating ourselves, all the contractors, the operations, activities, programs, management systems, so it's across the board. And that performance plan is centered on that organizational line of business. So for example, and I'll pick on Steve Stamper from Nuke Materials, his organization has facility reps and facility engineers, so they will focus on facility operations within Nuke Materials, and then his facility engineers will focus on safety systems and their documented safety analysis documentation, all the safety basis documentation. So their assessments will focus on that, including maintenance and such. And if there's any particular issue or issues that we're aware of, maintenance, ConOps, et cetera, then Steve and his staff will then say, hey, I want you guys to focus on a certain aspect of that, and that will be included in the AAP, in his AAP. My office then will prior to the beginning of the fiscal year, will then assimilate all those annual assessment plans, those AAPs, and then we'll keep them in context, watch how they're being done throughout the year. It feeds our performance metrics that all of our assistant managers and Mr. Mcmillan and Mr. Budney will see, and then we can track that throughout the year, how well we're doing against our assessments. Any questions before I know I'm giving a lot of detail out, but please. Yes, sir.
Your DOE order, is it in compliance with NQA1?
Yes. Yes, we have two primary orders. Order 2261B that outlines the assessment process and how that is supposed to occur. And then we have if you will, in parallel, Order 4141D, which is our QA order.
Are these audits performed by qualified, certified NQA auditors?
No. Well, let me say not all assessments are. We do have certain QA assessments that need to be done as part of a triennial recertification process. And those individuals are in my division, and they will do those types of audits. but it's not across the board. Okay. Any other questions? Okay. Now we come to the assessment part. How do we conduct the assessment? So with the AAP in hand, all of the SMEs, and I'll include that as facility reps, facility engineers, safety system oversight people. They will then conduct these assessments all in accordance with our Integrated Performance Assurance Manual, lovingly referred to as the IPAM. And that IPAM outlines the entire assessment process. How to generate the APAP, how to generate the annual assessment plan, how to, it'll point to guides on actually how to create the system inside of our issues management system, what the LOIs, the types of LOIs that are needed, the types of assessments that are performed. But the crux of it is with each individual SME or groups of SMEs that they do the assessments, they will generate these lines of inquiries. And those lines of inquiries will focus the assessor on what they need to go look at for either a specific problem area or for programmatic or procedural adherence. Now the assessor does the assessment, they get all the results. So part of the process now is documenting all this so that it is traceable. Because as everybody will do, is they will do the assessment today, and then 6 months from now they'll forget the details of it. So a primary goal of documenting these assessments is for traceability and for readability for later on, as we can look back over history and look over past year's performance to give us a good indicator for the future. Then as the outcome, as we look at these results, then we can have a few outcomes. And I'll start with the noteworthy practice. This is where the assessor will deem that, hey, the contractor is doing a particular activity in a certain manner, and say, hey, that's noteworthy. We need to note how they're doing that because it's really good how they're doing it, whether it's method or performance. So we'll call that a noteworthy practice. If there are specific issues, okay, then we will call those findings. And there's 3 categories of findings, so 2 are on this slide. The lowest finding is just a plain old finding. And we define a finding as any action, a document, or a condition that deviates from certain minimum requirements. It could be procedures. It could be some work was performed not fully in accordance with the procedure. That would be a finding. It could be against a document, let's say an engineering calculation. The calculation wasn't documented as according to our E7 procedure on calculations. The next level of finding is a finding that requires some sort of a corrective action plan. So these findings are considered by the assessor and the line management to have a significant impact on the site, the workers, the public, or the environment. And in those instances, we require a formal written response from the contractor that says how they're going to address the problem, how they're going to fix it, and how they're going to prevent recurrence of that problem in the future. The corrective action plans, like I said, is a formal document. We send over the assessment results, and we require the contractor to reply back in writing with that plan that describes, let me go back, and that plan will describe or lay out all of the corrective actions needed to fully resolve that problem. Okay. The worst finding is one where we would call a DOE concern. And these, we reserve these, we issue these out as needed. We don't we don't dole these out every day. But these concerns are where we have an egregious noncompliance with the way they're doing business or operations, or a series of noncompliances that haven't been resolved over time and indicate some sort of programmatic failure. So we call those a finding with a DOE concern. Okay. Both the findings with CAPS and the findings that make up a DOE concern, both of those have to get formally transmitted to the contractors. So it's either through a contracting officer or a contracting officer's representative. For DOE concerns, we also have the site manager sign off on the document. Because it's at that level that we're communicating from Mike to the contractor, says, hey, we've got a major problem here that needs to be addressed now. Sort of outlined or on the outskirts is a finding that was corrected on the spot or completed on the spot. So for example, if an assessor is out doing a facility walk down and they come across a radiation sign, a radiation area sign that was, say, illegible or partially illegible, they could then bring up that to the facility management. And if the facility management has someone rewrite that label to where it fixed it where it was legible, we would note that as completed on the spot. We would still write that up in the assessment, but we will note it as it's already been corrected. And then we have our last category is opportunities for improvement. So if the assessor is doing their assessment, looking at what's going on in the facility or with the program, and they note something that or see an opportunity that the contractor could improve the quality, could include or improve their process or improve their productivity, we'll write that up as an opportunity for improvement. The contractor, though, is not obliged to act on OFI, but they are obliged to disposition it. They need to tell us what they're going to do with it. Okay, now that the assessment's done, okay, the assessor will then submit that to their functional area manager. Typically, that's their supervisor. Supervisor then performs that first level review of the assessment and the assessment results. We'll ask any questions of the assessor, make sure they understand it, make sure it's clear, written clearly, and let's say somebody who has not been involved with the assessment can read that assessment and follow it and reach the same conclusions as the assessor. Once that's done, then the FAM will approve it. And the next step then is for that particular assessment to go before a management review board. These MRBs are held within the organization and across the organization. So for instance, in my office, in my division, I have site engineering, fire protection, quality assurance. If I have someone, let's say from quality assurance, did an assessment and they found some issues with some documents or facility that say it's under Steve Stamper's purview and the materials, we then invite Steve and his staff to our MRB so they can participate in that review board. And in that review board then is another chance or another level for the managers, the directors, and the assistant managers to ask questions of that assessor, look at that assessment, and make sure that we agree with the results. The last step then, once it's been through the MRB and approved, we then commence to transmit that to the contractor. Findings, OFIs, and noteworthy practices, assessments with just those three categories of items in there are just sent directly straight out of our issues management system. We don't require formal written documentation for that. It's in the system. Our administrator will hit the button and it goes over. As I said before, with findings with CAPS or finding with a concern, that does require a formal transmittal letter. In that letter, we will then give the contractor, we could give the contractor up to 45 or 60 days to provide that formal response. There are instances where we go shorter, and there's instances where this time frame needs to be expanded based on the complexity of the issue. Once the contractor receives the assessments, then they go about and within the issues management system, start defining what are the corrective actions that need to take place to address the issues. So the contractor will then get it to the appropriate group, the appropriate division. That division will assign a responsible manager and a responsible assignee. The assignee will then develop one or more corrective actions to address the issue and get that all into the issues management system. When there is a finding with a CAP, those corrective actions must, before they can go off and work on them, must be approved by the department. So in that formal response, they will provide that list of corrective actions, come back and say, you know, here's 1 through 5 or 1 through 10, whatever. Could be 100 actions. And then the assessor, the SME, will then go through there and evaluate that corrective action plan to see if those identified actions indeed correct the issue and will prevent recurrence. And the last bullet down here, our issues management system, there's no limit on the corrective actions. It could be 1, it could be 100 as needed to address the issue, to fully address the issue. Once that corrective action is approved, or if it's just for a regular finding, an ordinary finding, then the contractor and their actionable assignees will then go off and work the issues, work the actions. And in the issues management system, they have dates in there established by which to complete those actions. So it could be a week, it could be a month, some of them may be 6 months to resolve. It just depends on the magnitude of the problem. Then that can be tracked and trended within the issues management system on how well the contractor is resolving those corrective actions and closing them out. Okay, so that's our process, okay? And I know from the last CAB meeting, one of the initiating questions for my presentation was, how well is the department, or how does the department address, if you will, reports or assessments from outside organizations, say from the Office of the Inspector General or from a headquarters Office of Enterprise Assessments. So I just wanted to give 2 brief examples. In May of this year, OIG came in and did an assessment of how well we do that, how well we document outside assessments. We would call them outside assessments. How well we document those assessments, and how do we track, how do we trend, how do we get those to the contractor. So out of that, they had 3 recommendations for DOE Savannah River. The first one was recommendation 2. And what they found was that we didn't have it specifically clearly written in our IPAM how to do that. So actually this slide is out of date because this action is now complete as of a couple of weeks ago. So we now have specific language as seen here as to how we will do that. For example, for Office of Enterprise Assessments, if they have findings, we will enter those as findings with a CAP. If they identify deficiencies, we will identify those as findings without a CAP. And observations will be noted as opportunities of improvement or noteworthy practices as appropriate. Recommendation number 3, which was already covered actually by completion of 2. And then the other example I wanted to point out is recently EA came in and did an assessment on how we do some part of our safety basis documentation dealing with specific admin controls. Yeah. We entered those results. We took that report, put it into our issues management system. It has a record number, and that particular assessment had 3 deficiencies and when we put that into the system and had these discussions with the assessor and with the facility, in this case, Steve Stamper's organization, he and his directors, we actually identified or required that those findings have a cap. So we upgraded the significance of those deficiencies, as EA called it. And then they had 1 OFI that we left as an OFI. That document, that assessment was transmitted to the contractor, and they are actively working on closing that now. Okay, so this last slide, just very quickly. The SRS, we do have a robust, integrated issues management system. All of our site contractors use this, save for our small contracts, like Amoresco, for instance, doesn't use STAR, but everybody else uses the STAR system. And our DOE Savannah River oversight process, we do have an organized and methodical way that we oversee the contractors, perform those assessments, and then document that within our issues management system. Okay, that's it. Any questions?
Folks, any questions from around the table? Jim, we'll start with you.
Yeah, hi, Jim Giel, CAB. Becoming an assessor in a fairly complex environment, what are the requirements and qualifications? How long does it take someone to achieve that? Can you just give us a picture of that?
Sure. For our assessors who are will perform assessments on technical areas or nuclear facilities, we require those individuals to go through our technical qualification program. That program is the initial qualification. The individual is given up to 18 months to qualify in a specific or an assigned functional area. Could be civil, structural, could be mechanical, could be facility representative, okay? And each of those functional area qual standards has a set of competencies that the individual must train to and be qualified to by a qualifying official. Yeah.
About how long does that process typically take?
Some individuals take 18 months, some individuals knock them out within a year. And that qualification process is typically occurring in parallel with their normal duties. And so in my group, for instance, where I've had several new hires, I'll bring the individuals in, give them a few months to get acclimated to DOE-SR and Savannah River site life and how we do things. And then I will pair up that individual with a trained person to actually go on assessments and be part of those assessments so they can see how they're done. So they're being mentored in the assessment process. And so that's why it will take 12 to 18 months to knock these out, because they're not doing it full time. Yeah. Okay.
Candace?
Candace Cave, CAB. I have a few questions,
Yes.
more just so I can make sure I understand
Sure,
everything. So when you're saying organizations, are you talking about contractors?
Well, when I say organization, I can mean it two ways. One is within the office of DOE Savannah River, we have various business lines, okay? The office that I'm in, Office of Safety and Quality Assurance, that is an organization. Steve Stamper's organizations, he's the Deputy Assistant Manager for Nuke Materials. Jim Folk will be here tomorrow, Assistant Manager for the liquid waste.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Okay, and so I had another question about the assessors. Are they DOE employees or are they contractors?
They can be both. Predominantly, they are DOE SR employees,
Okay.
federal employees. We do have a couple of instances, probably my guess, knowing less than a half a dozen, maybe subcontractors directly to us. But when they do their assessments, they're always discussing it with their federal employee mentor or person that they would report to.
So I think you said it takes about 18 months before they are fully trained. How's the turnover rate for an assessor? Do people stay 2 years, 5 years, 10 years?
Good question. Historically, they're well seasoned. I'm an oddity. I'm an old timer. I've been here 35 years. I qualified very early on. I have had recently in the last couple of years where I've had people who were recently qualified and then found a better job. And I've actually had an instance where an individual was in the middle of qualification, got offered a better job and left. So I would say recently we're beginning to see some turnover, but up until just a few years ago, they've been at the site for quite a while.
I'm almost done.
That's right, that's right.
So during the planning phase of the assessment, are there any multidisciplinary or like cross-organization meetings?
Yes,
Okay.
yes, absolutely. In our annual performance assurance plan, in the site level one, we identify by quarter, and there's really 4 major entities that we will do this in. This is the major contracts we will do this on. We will call that a team assessment. And that is a multidisciplinary, cross-functional area, cross-organizational assessment. So we'll pull in individuals from my organization, individuals from the appropriate line organization. We'll pull in folks like Avery Hammett for environmental as needed. So yes, it's a cross-organizational and cross-discipline.
Okay, my last question.
That's fine, that's fine.
Okay, so for the issues management system, that's a DOE system, or is that is it like for the whole complex or just SRS?
The system that we have at the site is actually one that was homegrown some 25 years ago. SRS actually developed that system. It's an Oracle-based modular database system.
Gotcha.
So there's various components to quote STAR, site tracking and assessment reporting. And that system has been maintained by SRS, and through our various service level agreements, other contractors have bought that service, and so SRS hosts it and they can use the system. SRS is currently looking to replace that system within the next 3 years or so with a off-the-shelf product that's let's say more user-friendly and in today's computing environment. There's people who love STAR, there's people who hate STAR, but actually STAR has been a very robust and proven tool for the last 25 plus years.
Sounds like it. Well, thank you so much.
All right, you're welcome. Thank you.
We'll cut across the table over to Narinder.
Brett, thank you for making a very wonderful presentation, especially on findings. I enjoyed it.
You're welcome. Thank you.
My question is, has there been any finding where the contractor has been fined for not complying with the requirement?
Yes. However, there are few and far in between. The last I recall, and I don't know the specifics, was probably 3 years or 4 years ago or so. And I'm stretching my memory now. But yes, that has occurred.
Would that be at Charles Anderson?
Correct. Yeah.
Now, my follow-up question is, when you perform the assessment, do you send the LOIs to the assessee before ahead of time, or?
Yes, we do. Well, yes and no. For the larger cross-functional, cross-organizational team assessments, we typically pick a lead assessor, and that lead assessor will then gather all of those lines of inquiries from the assessors, and then we'll provide that to the contractor that we are evaluating at that time. Individual assessments for this job that I would go do, sometimes I would, sometimes I wouldn't. It was not a requirement. Now, I didn't have this on the slide, but what is our practice is that at the end of the assessment, the assessor will then share those results with the contractor and say, this is what we found, this is what we saw, and give the contractor an opportunity to provide any corrections. Call it an informal factual accuracy review, if you would.
My last question.
Sure.
Please forgive me, I just keep
I
coming.
understand, I'm fine.
Does DOE do any self-assessments within the departments?
Yes, we do. We do. Not quite as many as we need to be. We do need to improve in that area, but we do self-assessments.
Do you find any
introspective? Yes, we do. Yes, we do.
And
we do.
Corrective actions taken?
And we develop the corrective action, and we will put it in STAR. Yes, sir. We sure do.
Do you give any time frame to the? Thank you very much.
Yes. Sure.
Jim, given by the timing of when your car went up, I bet Candace sparked a follow-up for you, huh?
Probably, yeah. In reading through some of the reports that are available, et cetera, there seemed to be a recurring issue where it was not easy to determine if a corrective action plan was required to resolve the particular issue that was being dealt with. That seemed to require some debate and discussion. Is that a fair assessment, and how do you determine once and for all when a corrective action plan is required?
Well, so yes, that has happened. Yes, so let me answer the simple one first. On an earlier slide where I talked about the findings with the CAPs, one more, here we go. The fundamental criteria we use is what is the level of impact that finding has to the site, the workers, the facility, and/or the environment. So we always cast it against that and make that, the assessor will make that determination at the first level. Okay. The second level of evaluation comes from the functional area manager, who actually is the first level approval of that assessment. And there's been times where the FAM will actually read the finding and know the assessor wants a corrective action plan, and then we'll speak more with that assessor in detail and then find out, no, we really don't need a corrective action plan. And the opposite happens. The assessor may have an OFFE or a finding, and then talking with the FAM, will then say, oh, hey, this really is a finding. We really do need a cap on this. And then the last level of checks and balances, if you will, is the management review board, where the assessor then sits with their peers and the other directors and and at times as needed, the office director or the assistant manager will join. And at that level, we'll have that check and balance, that question and answer, and talk about this very thing. Is that just a finding, or is that really a finding with a cap, or have we had a whole series of these things that now it's time for a concern letter?
Greg and Charles, y'all's cards went up at the exact same time. Who wants to go first? Charles, we'll start with you.
Thank you, Charles Hilton, CAB. I want to go back to the basic of how do you become an assessor?
Yes, sir.
These have to be pretty specialized people, I would think.
In their job function, okay? So if I hire if I had a job opening that was a civil structural person, first I go through my hiring process and I select the individual, hire them, get them on board, and now they're at the site day one. I would have already identified, I know what I want that person to do. I know what kind of job they need to go do. And so then the supervisor will then identify what functional area qualification standard they should come under. So as I said, I think currently the department has roughly 20 different qualification standards. Chemical engineering, mechanical, civil structural, senior technical safety manager, there's a bunch. The supervisor will say which qual standard does that individual need to be under that's best suited for that job, and that will be the primary. If there is a secondary identified, that will come after the initial, and that's done on a separate schedule. But the supervisor will make that determination and then assign that individual to that qualification standard.
Okay, you hire me to do
Yes,
whatever.
sir. Mm-hmm.
I spend 12 months there and I have potential to do whatever I'm supposed to be doing. All right, at some point, is there a national standard that these people have to meet to do this? Or is this a DOE nuclear standard?
It's a DOE standard. All of our functional area qualification standards are DOE standards. They're found on the department's technical standards webpage, and you can just cruise the list and look in the title that says Functional Area Qualification Standard, and you'll see what they are. So these were developed by headquarters, but in conjunction with the Federal Technical Capabilities Panel, FTCP, I think I got that right. And this is a group that was set up to administer the technical qualification program. And that group will then direct or steer what qual standards are needed and ensure that they're periodically reviewed and updated. And that group will then say, so for instance, I know I've participated on a couple of them myself over the years, both in mechanical systems and civil structural. That board will then appoint or say, it'll be set up with a review committee or a technical committee and say, hey, the civil structural people, you need to go update the standard or generate the standard. And then we would get together as a small technical writing group and then revise or revise or update that standard. And then it goes through its own review process, just like all of our technical standards do. So it's at the headquarters level.
All right. I'm going to
absolutely
reverse rudders on you.
Sure.
Change the subject.
Sure.
All right. I kind of understand what you're assessing. It could be a safety program, could be. All right, let's look at it. I'm a contractor now.
Mm-hmm.
I bid this job for $1 million and I'm going to do it in a year.
Yeah.
All right, I meet all the safety requirements, but I have one problem. I'm 3 years into the one-year contract. Is that something that you deal with, or is that somebody else?
That would be primarily somebody else, but we would be involved. And the way we're involved is, as a technical side of the house, we would be involved with the contracting officer's technical representative, who in then turn is in tune with the contracting officer. And of course, their office director or assistant manager. So if the assessor is seeing contractual performance issues, let's call it schedule to make it easy, that's going to be known ahead of time. I mean, that's not something that's going to linger too very long, because one, the assessor or the subject matter expert or the program manager on the Fed side will see that schedule delay. And then that communication starts going up the chain, so we can get that corrected much sooner rather than later. But if it's a technical aspect driving the schedule non-performance, then the assessor can tell his supervisor or the office director as appropriate and say, look, this is what I see the problem is. And then that office director or contracting officer's rep will then work with contracts and the assistant manager and front office then to resolve the issue.
Thank you.
You're welcome. All right. Greg?
Thank you, Greg Murray, CAB. All right, so I want to make sure I've got this all classified in my brain. We're talking about evaluating contractors only.
Principally.
Principally,
Yeah.
okay.
We can't, it's what I was getting to the previous question is, we do perform introspective assessments on ourselves.
Right,
Yeah.
sure, okay.
It's just not as many as what we do on the contractor.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Okay, and then you do performance assessments.
Mhm.
And then at one point, I was thinking you were doing safety stuff also. Is, like you talked about the sign that wasn't properly, that would be more of a safety issue, right?
It could be programmatic. If it was say a radiological protection assessment and the radiation protection SME was going around the facility doing his assessment and noted that individual can note it in their assessment. Certainly bring it up to the facility management and get it corrected on the spot, completed on the spot. It could also be from our safety individuals. We have safety engineers, we have industrial hygienists. If they're doing their assessment for their own functional area and they come across this and they see that, then it's part of their responsibility to also to make that issue known and not just walk on by and don't see a thing.
I think what I'm trying to clarify in my mind is the difference of what y'all are doing. Are you doing performance evaluation or are you doing auditing? So
Okay.
if you were doing performance, would it go towards their work award? What do you all have
Yes.
to do with how much they're awarded at the end of the year?
We do both, and let me do the audit because that's a much smaller population. The only time that DUESR will do formal audits is if it is for quality assurance purposes in regard to completing the triennial recertification that's required by Order 414-1D, our quality assurance order. That is the only time we will do a formal, quote, audit that will be done under the auspices of a lead auditor and using set lines of inquiry, okay? Otherwise, we are doing performance assessments. And those LOIs that the assessors use are generated by that assessor. That assessor has an option to use new LOIs as needed to suit the time of the assessment, or it can be from a template that they've developed over time that says, hey, okay, I'm going to go back and review calculations now. It's been a couple of years, so I'm going to use what I did the last time. And so it's that time, when they develop that assessment, that assessor has an idea of, I need to go do a program assessment, or I'm just doing, let's call it an operational awareness assessment, to say I'm just going to go out in the plant and look and see how things are. They will tailor those LOIs accordingly before they go out. And so that assessor then has in mind, okay, I'm looking for these 10 things, or I'm looking for these 5 things. That's why the documentation of the assessment becomes all the more important at the end of the process, so that it's filed, it's readable. 6 months from now, you can pick it up and read it and go, oh yeah, I remember what I did.
Mm-hmm.
So then we go to plan for the next fiscal year, they can look back and say, I did this assessment, that assessment, I covered these LOIs, or I didn't touch that area. Then they can say, okay, for this year, we need to go look over here where we haven't assessed in some time. So it's all a integrated process that we use.
Okay. All right, okay, that's fine. I guess I'm still not clear exactly how, if you guys didn't do anything, how the award, the performance award would be.
Okay, I'm sorry, I didn't close on that question. So at the, well, I'll use SRNS as the example. So SRNS, we have a monthly performance evaluation review with the contractor, with SRNS. As part of that process, each organization with DUESR has input into that review process, into that subjective fee process. And we will have in that month's subjective fee, we will include things that are either noteworthy, positives, or things that need improvement. And so we don't hit them, in those subjective reviews, we don't provide, let's call it the everyday things like, oh, you didn't empty the trash this week. We don't include those things, but we'll include the more significant things, because these reviews are conducted at the site manager, Mr. Budney's level, with the president of SRNS. They're handled at that level, and then with all the counterparts. So those results of those assessments and the results of our DOE staff interactions with the contractor all feed into that review process.
Okay.
So we can't, so yes, there is, it all will play into that award fee and performance fee process.
All right.
Yep.
James, are we out of time pretty much?
No, I just stood up to stand up. You're good.
Okay. All right, I'll ask one, maybe two more questions real
Sure.
quick. So how many findings do you end up in a year?
Last year, I think we had 140 something.
Just all kinds or just findings?
Just findings. This year, today, I think we're probably close to 155, as memory serves, from last week or so that I was looking at this.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, and then finally, the last thing you talk about, the site manager signing off.
Mm-hmm.
On how many times have the, whatever you call it, the APAPs been rejected?
Not formally rejected, but Mr. Budney doesn't hesitate to pop out an email or pick up the phone and send a question saying, what is this? I don't understand.
Okay.
In fact, for this year's APAP, he did just that. He says, I don't understand this piece. What is this? And then once we explained it and we actually had to clarify it, then he signed off on it. So it's not a carte blanche signature.
Right.
Right.
So when's the last time you can think of that the site manager formally rejected?
Never formally rejected,
Okay.
because typically we work that as part of the concurrence process.
Mm-hmm.
So once it's in the front, let's say all the organizations have put their concurrence on it, it's in the front office, then our chief engineer, deputy manager, or Mr. Budney, if they have questions, they will email or pick up the phone and say, what is this? I'm not going to sign this until this is resolved.
Okay.
And then it sits there until we give them an updated document.
Okay. All righty. Thank you.
Any other questions, comments, concerns from around the table? Staying no? Fred, thank you very much.
You're welcome. Thank you.
And I love it when we end on an even number because that makes the math so easy. So let's take a 15-minute break. We'll be back in our seats at 2:50, okay? 2:50. Thank you. Yes, please. Screensaver. He asked you for a screensaver. Oh, okay, sorry. Good, I'm glad that you liked it. Thank Jim because it was because of questions that Jim Gill asked. All right, folks, this is your 2-minute warning. Let's start to find our seats. We will get started again in 2 minutes. Thank you. Again.
One that you get out before rush hour yesterday.
Yeah.
Well, I left yesterday. It's right at 4 hours, which isn't bad.
That's not bad at all.
All right, folks. I'm showing 2:50 on the clock. Let's go ahead and get started again. Our next presentation is going to be about infrastructure, and I think you're really going to enjoy it. Before we do that, Charles, you had a comment that you wanted to make.
Looking back over my earlier comments about the Los Alamos tour, the Justice 40 initiative, I made the comment that we had found tritiated water in Burke County. That's groundwater. We have not found tritiated water. We found it in the Savannah River, which went downstream. So it's a big difference between the two. I need to be factual, just as I ask our presenters to be factual. So I wanted to correct that we have not found tritiated water in Burke County.
Much appreciated. Thanks, Charles.
Okay.
All right, Dave, let's get started.
Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. It's such a pleasure to be here talking to you today. I'm Dave Bender, and I've been at Savannah Riverside for 14 years now. I retired from the Army after 28 years, came to Savannah Riverside. I was the construction manager there at SWPF for 3 years before I came over to this job, being the director of what we call infrastructure. We call it area completion, but I'll just call it environmental remediation. So that's the division that I am privileged to be supervisor of. So we're going to talk a little bit about common infrastructure and utilities today, and some clean energy and sustainability and green topics as well. And this is the big picture. And now, see up here, you're going to see green in two contexts down here, so to speak. I'm going to talk about how we're trying to make the common infrastructure and utilities infrastructure at Savannah Riverside, where there's very few problems, and it provides the support to all our mission programs so that they can accomplish their mission. And I'm going to give you some examples of how we're employing this Road to Green plan that we've embarked on. And no briefing is complete without a little chat about money and budget. And then we're going to talk about the other green, and that's in the environmental sense, going green a little bit before we wrap up. And also, that's our river water pump house back in about 70 years ago. Keep that picture in mind. You're going to see it again. So I'll move on to, this is just a quick snapshot of the infrastructure, the varied infrastructure that we have here at Savannah Riverside. And I'll start up here in the our left-hand corner here, electric power. Of course, electric power is very important, not only to Savannah Riverside, but also to all of you, everyone here. We divide up electric power into two major areas. One is transmission, that's getting the power on the site, and then distribution, how we get the power to all the different users that we have. And what's important about that we have a local utility provider that provides us the transmission piece and maintains our transmission lines, and that's Dominion Energy of South Carolina. And then our M&O contractor, SRS, does the work for getting the power to all the individual users. And for common infrastructure, again, these are the facilities that, that support the site as a whole. You know, our badge office, for instance, I'm sure you've all been there at least once or twice. Our labs, our administrative buildings that support more than one program are good examples of what falls in common infrastructure. And also things like roads as well. And I put up there 119 miles, that's 119 miles of 2-lane paved roads. Now we also have partners with the U.S. Forest Service that maintains our secondary roads, which we have miles and miles of secondary roads which are unpaved. But I'm going to talk about a little bit later about roads. And then we have about 6 different water systems. We have fire water, we have domestic water. You're going to hear a little bit more detail about river water. We have sanitary wastewater. And we also have service and process water, which is non-potable water that's focused towards specific areas for mission processing. We also have, now we're down to 2 trains that primarily move large items between our various areas. And we do have 2 lakes and dams, we have 2 major dams, I'll say, and for 2 lakes. And it says high hazard, but that's only, not that the dam itself is hazardous, it's the consequences should it fail. And it's nowhere close to being failed. We take good care of our dams. And I'll wrap up with, over here on steam energy. Steam is a necessary form of energy on the Savannah River site. All our major processes use it in some way, DWPF, Defense Waste Processing Facility, the H Canyon, even NNSA and Tritium still use it, and it's definitely used in the tank farms to move waste around. What's interesting about steam energy is that the majority of that we have through an energy savings performance contract called Amoresco, and their plant also provides us with electric power, which I'll talk on a little bit later in the briefing. Does anybody have any questions? Before I jump into, okay, this is a busy chart. I promise they'll not be this bad in the future. But this chart is a bit of the culmination of how we manage, analyze, and improve our common infrastructure and utilities at Savannah River site. And if I total them all up, we've got 12 systems here. So what we do, every month, we go through each of these systems and we gauge what its status is. Now, what we want things to do, if y'all, green is always a good color. It means go. So if it's green, we say that it's doing its job, just minor deficiencies. Now, we look at a system and we gauge it. Well, it's got some problems. It's still limping along, but it's doing its job, but we better watch it. Then it becomes what we would say yellow, but it's at risk. And then finally, if we have a customer or a mission that's not getting the support it needs, or we think we could be in trouble in the near future, then we term it as unsatisfactory and red. So our goal for common infrastructure utilities is to always be green. And I mean that in the systems are always up and running, and we don't foresee any major problems in the near future. So that's what I mean by our Road to Green plan. And look up there in the fine print. So this is what we think, if we get the budgeting, we get the prioritization, we get the focus we need to put together improvement plans, to execute our improvement plans, we think we'll be pretty much green by 2027. And I'm going to start, next slide, I'm going to start off talking about 3 of how we put this Road to Green plan into how we execute or put it into business here. So I just thought I'd talk about our roads, first of all. Now, on that previous slide, I talked about 119 2-lane miles. Now, that's a lot of miles, that's a lot of roads, and the thing is, reason it takes a little while to try to get the roads done is because paving is expensive. We calculate about $1 million to $1.2 million per mile. And we have 119 miles, so you can do the math on that, and you see it's pretty expensive. So we have to be very judicious and only focus on the priority roads, the roads that people use a lot. All our folks on site use a lot. And site's got like 11,000, 12,000 people coming on site every day and doing their job. That's about 35,000 just road trips each day on a road. So they get a lot of use. So our initial focus back in 2017, we embarked on repaving our roads. We were trying to make sure we got the roads safe that come out of Aiken, and Road C that comes out of Jackson. And those are our two primary access roads. And we also had Road 2 here that cross connects. But this past summer, we were able to finally move on to what we call the facility access roads. And that was what we call Road 4, right here in the heart of Savannah Riverside. But we're making pretty good progress. Again, when I look at these critical roads, we total it up. We got about almost 75, 74 2-lane miles, and we're about 60% there. So we've made some great progress over the last 5 years. And I'll just brag a little bit about Road 4. Due to all the, I'll hit it again, but when it comes to funding infrastructure on Savannah Riverside, we do not get direct program, so to speak, dollars like liquid waste or new materials does. We have to make all the decisions and when it comes to funding here on Savannah Riverside through direct support, what we call our indirect program. So it depends on the year, how well the budgets are going, what's the president's budget looking like, what does the execution by all the different programs look like. And that's what gives us our crystal ball on whether or not we have enough money to tackle a road project. And this past year, we were talking almost mid-spring, we were able to look in the crystal ball and say, yeah, I think we'll have enough money to do a road project. And so we were able to do what we call Road 4. And you can see it kind of comes right there between, here you got H area with Tritium and the Canyon, S area with DWPF, SWPF, Saltstone up there, the burial ground right here, F area where we have a tank farm as well, and all that work that's going on in NSA. So that was a pretty key road to get. And I'm glad we were able to get it this year and got it completed before the physical year was over. So very proud of that. Still got a ways to go. Again, these are the roads that we're looking at next. There's another road that cross-sections through, Road E, but we have a primary access road down here, Road B, that goes out to the Barnwell Gate. We want to get to as soon as possible. And also, we actually, even though we share it with the county, we got a road that goes from like the Aiken Gate all the way to the Jackson Gate that goes in front of the lab and the badging office too. That's our road too that we want to get to. That's our Road 1. Let's talk a little bit about facilities. You know, it's more near and dear to a building or a facility than its roof. And 10 years ago, this was the state of our technology for dealing with roof leaks. We were very proud that we had these comprehensive bibs with jugs. We had people scheduled on weekends to come in if it rained so that they could empty out the jugs. It was really a mess. So you can imagine. And you can kind of see the after effects maybe on the slide a little bit. You see all the water staining there. And of course, you know what it does to tile and roofs and everything comes caving in, and it's really a mess. But we took a look at what we had, and I'm talking common infrastructure here, all our common infrastructure facilities. And since about 2013, we've been able to rank and prioritize, garner the funding, and we've knocked out about 67% of our need. We still have about 13% more to go, but I'm happy to say that that those are lesser priority buildings, more like warehouses, shops where maybe only a few people actually work. So we think we're on the cusp once we complete actually one big administrative building, and I'll go into that slide just next, actually turning our facilities green, that we think we don't have too many major problems. Sure, HVAC systems are going to go out. Yes, we're going to need to recarpet, but for the most part, the structural integrity of our facilities for common infrastructure facilities are pretty darn good.
Dave, I have a question on that slide, if you don't mind going back to it, Amy.
There you go.
So in 2013, when you had those situations, would anything on that chart have been red? Is that yellow? Is that a yellow situation, or is that a red situation?
I would call it, I think we were calling that red at the time.
Okay. I was just curious if in the last, I don't know,
We had
5 years you've had red on that chart?
Yes, we
Okay.
would have back in 2013.
Okay.
I have to,
So that's progress.
thank you. Now, 730B is the site's main headquarters building. We deliberately saved that one for last, so to speak. We wanted to take care of all the other buildings rather than, obviously we didn't want to be seeing that headquarters gets special treatment as always first, but we did hold off on 730B for that reason. And so we had to endure some leaks in and around, especially around the elevators. Some folks may have, that building have noted. But we were able to, again, through diligent prioritization, putting together a plan and with discipline to execute the plan, we were able to just last week, complete that roof. So happy to say that that roof has been done. That's a lot of square feet. Out of 800,000 square feet, this is like 39,000. So that was a big roof for us. Now, speaking of, I'm saying now we got our facilities looking like they're going to go green, but I want to point out something. Does anybody see the difference here between the existing roof and kind of what's going on here? Spoiler alert, well, we put on what's known as a cool roof. It's basically a roof with a reflective coating. So not only are we coming green in facilities, but we're becoming more green by putting on a roof that reflects the sunlight, therefore requires less energy for the building during the summer months when our air conditioning is being maximized. So that was another, and that's one thing we've been planning or been instituting since 2013 is to use cool roofs, energy efficient roofs whenever possible. Now, let me touch on the river water system. River water system is quite unique, I think, for Savannah Riverside, but I'm sure a lot of the industries maybe you all work for also draw Savannah River water or use it. I know Hanford's got a river water system too that they use out of Columbia River, but the river water system at Savannah Riverside came about because back in '52, when they were laying Savannah Riverside out, they were going to have 5 heavy water reactors. And those heavy water reactors were only designed to generate neutrons. And there's a lot of heat that comes out of a fission reaction. And so what do we do with that heat? It's not like these reactors didn't make electricity or boil water for any reason. So we had to get rid of that heat somehow or dissipate it. So that's why the river water system was devised and put into place. And it was capable of delivering about 30,000 gallons per minute. If you can imagine a swimming pool probably the size of this slug of water every minute being pulled out of the Savannah River and pushed into these cooling water basins up at each of those 5 reactors. So that's how river water system, why it was there. But of course, as the reactors were shut down in the late 80s, final one was closed. We still had a purpose for river water, and right now we use that river water to provide makeup water for that's called the bio cogeneration facility. That's the big steam plant that Amoresco runs for us and also produces electricity. So that's very key to the site. I mentioned earlier, steam is integral to many of our processes on Savannah Riverside. So that's one reason why we think the river water system is very important. And it also provides additional water for, we say, environmental needs in K&L area. What we mean there, we have kind of a standalone sanitary waste system, so it blends the water before it can make sure it meets all standards before it can be released to the environment. And it also provides us a backup should Parr Pond, and I'll talk about this a little bit later, Parr Pond's water level goes down. So we have the capability to put river water into Parr Pond so that we can keep contaminated sediments covered. Now, and this is another good example of a system with a bit of a complex project that we have here. It took a lot of power to move that much river water from the Savannah River up the hill slopes to those 5 reactors. It took a tremendous amount of power, and it had its own substation supporting it. Well, we had 2 substations. We call them 1G and 3G. 1G has since been deactivated, but now we have 3G. And those transformers that you see there are 70 years old. And I think I can safely say that. I don't think anybody here is close to 70 years old. So that's how old those transformers were. And they were super big, like 20 megavolt amps transformers. But what we wanted to do, again, thinking green, is that we need to right-size those transformers. One, replace them because they're old and they're more prone to malfunction and failure. But we wanted to make those transformers more right-sized to meet the current load. Therefore, we're not wasting as much energy having a big system powering electricity through those cores, creating heat that doesn't need it because we don't need the electricity. So we're able to downsize those to just the 1.5 MVA size. And we just had those delivered in July. This is basically a 6-year project we've been working on. And the thing I wanted to really bring up is that we had a good partnership with Dominion Energy, because technically the substation, even though Savannah Riverside owns the substation, we lease it and we pay Dominion Energy also to maintain it and to perform recapitalization projects. So not only are we working inside the Riverwater pump house itself to replace the switchgear, which has failed, but we're also replacing all the major components of the substation that supports it. And trying to synchronize big things like transformers, which even before the supply chain problems that we all have, was very difficult and required a lot of lead time too. So we were very happy to finally get those transformers on site so that we could wrap this project up and get it done by December of next year. Oh, here's the budget slide. This is my only one. And what I really wanted to point out here is that it takes a lot of money to keep all this stuff going. And what's really becoming apparent is out of that $170 million total there, try to divide this pie chart up, you can see this is all the utilities piece. Right here, we got steam. That's our bill just to Amoresco for steam. This is how much power in a year in dollars that we get from Dominion Energy we have to pay for. And we also have to maintain our distribution lines. We have to maintain our steam lines. So before you know it, over 50% of our common infrastructure and utilities budget is all about energy and its delivery. So that leaves us for fixing things, really about 30% of that. And so that's why it's tough sometimes to get those roads and buildings, facilities, all on the priority list. No, site can't function without this stuff, including water, by the way. Just can't function. well, we put up with leaking roofs there for a while. Yeah, we can put up with a few potholes, but eventually they're going to come and bite you. Not only because then it'll become a safety issue, especially you've got roof leaks, that creates water source, that creates mold. Then you got an unhealthy situation. Same thing with roads. Not only are we filling up potholes or repaving roads, we're also having a major effort to refurbish and redo a lot of our safety devices like guardrails and crossing signs and lights. So that's my one budget slide there. Now we'll go to the other side of green. Let's talk about clean energy and all the recent drivers that we have when it comes to going green in the environmental sense. We've been practicing sustainability since 2007. 2007, Energy Security Act came about 2007, and that's what we've been pretty much basing the site's program on for really the last, well, since then about the last 15, 20 years. Then along at the end of 2020 came along the Energy Security Act, and what this did to us is it said, okay, you've been doing a great job identifying all these energy savings projects. You know, whenever you do your audits of buildings, et cetera, now we're going to hold you to actually getting them done. So we're having to scramble, because before it was kind of like, well, we'll do it as we replace an HVAC system, we'll do it as we replace our lights when they burn out. But no, now they're saying, no, we're going to start measuring you on how you're going to get all that work done. Then came along EO, this is 14008, basically the first executive order came out, I don't know, January 21st, 22nd time frame, all set to go, telling us we've got to come up with plans to tackle the climate crisis, and this is for government. And that sent all the different agencies, you know, to the drawing board to come up with all the different plans and how we're going to get things done. And that was further refined in May of 21 with EO 14038, and all of a sudden we were starting to come up with different plans. Really, the last 2 years have been coming up with plans. One was called a CARP. There's the VARP, Climate Adaptation and Resilience Plan, and Vulnerability Adaptation and Resilience Plan, which is, I can describe the VARP as more of a strategic far-reaching on how you're going to prepare the site for the effects of climate change. CARP is a little bit more how you're dealing with, in the more midterm, how you're going to deal with keeping your facilities running up until your projects for the VARP kick into play. And then last December, we had Catalyzing Clean Energy Industries and Jobs, and now we're talking about carbon-free electricity and other things like zero-emission fleet strategy, all these different plans that we have to come up with. Now, the challenges that we have as this is all happening is that I don't think it's a big surprise. Everybody, yeah, electric power costs are going up. Ours went up another 10% back in May. DESC they've gone to the Public Service Commission suggesting a 27% increase. And I'm talking about industrial customers here too. I don't know what it would be for the residential side, but this is what it looks like the Savannah River site rates are going to, or might end up with. It depends on what gets negotiated there. But we've done some calculations. We figured, this is going to be about a $4 million hit if that goes through each year. And that might be just the start. So we're factoring in, we've got to strongly consider increasing energy costs for the site. And you notice it was already over 50% of our common infrastructure and utility cost is wrapped up in energy and its delivery. One thing with all those different plans, by the way, it's really creating some interesting, how do we, setting up metrics, I guess, is the best way to put it. We have this thing called the sustainability plan and a dashboard that tries to capture how much progress we made with reducing greenhouse gases, for instance, how we reduce our our energy intensity per square foot for building that we have to provide BTUs to, how much water have we conserved. We have these metrics that we update every year, and with all these different plans, they're starting to add more and more things to our dashboards. So it's going to be quite interesting. We're waiting for the guidance to come out any day now of what the dashboard is going to look like for 22, which we have to get updated by December. So it'll undoubtedly require a heck of a lot of information digging and mining in order to meet that. So that's an interesting challenge that we have. And I think I mentioned earlier, supply chain is also impacting us quite a bit. And I'll hit that more on that in just a second. But that's what's driving us and what our challenges are. Now, let's see here. So we kind of bucket being green in the environmental sense in 3 categories. One is pretty much sustainability. That's where we try to be as efficient as possible when it comes to how we use energy and water consumption. And we figured we'd do quite a good job on that. Every time we have to replace an air conditioner, we use the best, most energy efficient that we can. We replace our fluorescent bulbs with LEDs whenever we can. As I mentioned earlier, but the Energy Security Act of 2020 says, no, you just can't do it Wednesdays and Tuesdays. You need to do it by building wholesale. So we're trying to work through that one. And we feel like we're also pretty much Johnny on the spot when it comes to repairing water leaks. So we minimize the amount of water that gets wasted because of faulty piping or undue breaks that we experience. And that seems to be on a decline with us last few years. So that's a good news story there. Resiliency. And that's actually this dovetails perfectly with what our goals were in the big facility road to green plan, because our infrastructure is aging. And I commented on our 70-year-old Riverwater pump house and its substation. Well, it's aging. So yes, it's going to be even more vulnerable to the effects of climate change. So we need to get those replaced. We have 9 substations on site that could use new transformers and switchgear. So the Riverwater system, or Riverwater substation, is just the first that we hope to get fixed here in the next 10 to 15 years. Then finally, on the clean energy front, I'll just really talk about that really more in the next slide on our current strategy. But we are trying to implement what's called utility energy service contracts. We have to work with the Corps of Engineers and FEMP in order to make those happen. And we're also seeking ideas on how we could minimize the use of using fossil fuels. So what can we do to convert more to solar? And a good example is like a solar-powered pedestrian crossing. And we've also, I didn't have a picture of one to put up here. Another example is some of our sampling stations that monitor some of the streams on site. So these sampling stations are powered by solar power wherever possible. And this is our current effort there. In the immediate sense, when 14008 came out, we said, okay, we have our light duty fleet, our vehicle fleet, and we're talking pretty much pickups and below when I say light duty, and we've got like 600 on site. And so we said, okay, I think we could take on maybe 10% this first year, roughly. So we put in an order with GSA for 62 electric vehicles. I don't know if you read the papers much, but the manufacturers are pretty well stacked up. And of course, they've had their own supply chain problems. So we're not sure when those are going to come in. Sometime next year is what we've been told by GSA, but I can't give you a good definite date. But you know what happens if you're going to have electric vehicles? It's not like you could pull them up to the gas station, You're going to have to build some charging stations. So we've got a project into place to put in 16 charging stations too that we want. Our plan is to have that done before those vehicles get here so that we can support them. Again, same problem there too, is that they're hard to get and to get vendors lined up. There's such a demand, and again, supply chain has been really playing havoc with that field. But another place that we're looking at trying to go green is with a solar field. Now, some of you have been here on the CAB, at least in 2019. We took a really good stab at looking at putting in a 10 megawatt solar field on Savannah River site. And after we did studies and did the math, and we came to the conclusion at the time that it just wasn't economically feasible for us to put one in back in 2019. You got to remember, we, or the government, we don't enjoy our own subsidies. So we couldn't figure out a way to make it pay, because at the time when you're only paying 4 cents a kilowatt hour from our electrical provider, we could buy it through DESC, and then the cost it would take to make it with the solar field. So we said, okay, we'll table this for a couple of years and see what happens, see if technology improves. The costs are destined. We've been watching the cost of solar panels decline over the last 10 years. And battery technology is another one. Battery technology is key. I don't see how we can put in a solar field and make it work without batteries to offset bad weather, to also provide us a little bit of capability, like during the evenings when our peaks come into play. So we're negotiating right now with Dominion Energy on resurrecting that 10 megawatt solar field. And we've got a site, I know it's hard to see, but there's A area. If you know where the badge office right there. So the site just right there, you'll be able to see it once we finally clear the land and start construction there. But that's where our site is. And we're going to be working with, again, this is where we're going to be working with Corps of Engineers to put together this utility energy services contract. And of course, we're going to partner with FEMP so that we do that right. We had a lot of, now in the far term, we had a lot of enthusiasm from initially Dominion Energy wanting to get on the hydrogen bandwagon. This was right in the summer of 2021. And we looked for a site for a 75 megawatt field. We're talking almost 1,000 acres we would have to carve out. Now, I think somebody said 198,000 acres, 310 square miles earlier. Doesn't seem like a lot, but it really is. And plus to find land that's nice, flat, doesn't have a lot of swamps or creeks through it. So we've earmarked a site along the I-120, the Georgia 125 corridor there that might serve that purpose in the far term. As commercial hydrogen starts to show itself and its technology matures, and it looks like there's going to be a local demand for it. So that's what we've got in the strategic sense, is a larger solar field. Again, we would do that in concert with Dominion Energy to meet that need. Now, let's see. We've also done a lot of green things along the way when it comes to environmental remediation. And this is where Susan and John come into play a little bit with us, working with us. And we submitted 3 submissions this year for sustainability awards, 3 of them. And they all concern environmental cleanup. Now, the award winner this year was our Fido remediation project. Now, Fido remediation has been around. We've had this project going since 2006. What that essentially is watering pine trees with tritiated water, okay? Pine trees uptake it through photosynthesis and disperse it into the atmosphere. And because you really can't do anything to, how should I say, treat tritium other than disperse it so it's no danger to anybody. And that's about the best you could do. You don't want it in the groundwater because then eventually it gets to the Savannah River, and we all know that's a water source for several communities downstream. So the phytoremediation was put into place to head off this water that came out of our central area, there around E area, containing a 3-acre little pond, and then we pump it out to 51 zones, about 60 acres of pine trees. And what we found is that it's like 80% performance. 80% of it goes into the pine tree, into the soil, and gets took by the pine trees and then dispersed in the atmosphere. So it's really a remarkable process versus doing it the old traditional way is pumping that water up, dispersing it through either blowers or some other type of means to evaporate it. Instead, we just water pine trees. And then this year, why is it a sustainability award? Because we've calculated out that about 190 tons of carbon every year gets sequestered by these pine trees. So we were able to capitalize on our Fido project. So we were already green before we even knew it, so to speak, when it came to Fido. But that's a very low intent, and plus it just doesn't burn that much energy. All the energy it needs is to pump it out of the pond and disperse it to our 51 zones in that 60 acres. And we reduce the amount of treated water that gets into the water or the groundwater system by 70–80%. Now our next one, D area innovative groundwater treatment. Now again, Susan and John will be familiar with this one. Now this is really a two-phase project here. What you see in this picture right here, see that white? That's crushed limestone, by the way. It didn't just snow out there in D area. But that crushed limestone used to be where the coal used to be stored, because in the background here is the D area coal plant. And all that coal has been sitting there for like 60 years. And when coal interacts with rainwater, it creates the sulfuric acid, it seeps into the ground. So the ground has this very high pH. It's very acidic, obviously. And what happens then, it leaches the metals out. And all those metals get into the groundwater. So we had this very high pH water sitting right here below where that coal was stored. So what are we going to do about it? So the first project was we could have either let's just dig the soil up, go down 10 feet, haul it off to the Three Rivers landfill or some landfill. We figured we have $3 or $4 million to haul it up, not to mention all the CO2 you're going to generate from all those dump trucks hauling it away. Or our plan was, what was arrived on, is just why don't we just dig down about 5 feet to kind of break up the compaction of all that coal sitting there, break it all up, add some calcium carbonate, an amendment to it, because then that'll make the water as it comes through much more basic, so it'll balance out the pH. Seemed much better than hauling all that high acidic soil away. So that's what we did. Now the original plan was hey, I guess, what are we going to do? Everything's green around here, so why not we would put sod on top. Sod, if you've ever done any sod work around your house or anything, that stuff's pretty expensive, pretty labor intensive to get it down. And what do you have to do with sod after you put it down? You've got to water and fertilize it. So, but someone, I can't name the person, came up with the idea, well, why don't we just put crushed limestone down? And what a remarkable idea. Now we don't have to use the sod. Now we don't have to water it. Crushed limestone is basically a calcium carbonate 2. It'll also help with the filtration of the water and rainwater, and it'll further reduce the pH. Or excuse me, I should say increase the pH from acidic to more basic, which would then get the metals to fall out and stay there rather than be transported by the groundwater. Now, phase 2. How can we do this better? Oh, yes, sir.
When you put lime there, how deep you put the line, because over the period, it will become calcification and solidify, the roots won't penetrate.
Well, it was all mixed. We had a machine that mixed it together so it wouldn't quite clump together.
What the pH was raised to?
What's that, the pH?
What the pH of the soil was raised to?
Yes, yeah, that was the whole point, is, yeah, to raise the pH in the soil. Is that what you said? Okay. But we still had a lot of contaminated water or high pH, low pH water underneath, and we call this a treatability study. That's what you see here. And what we found is that we had a long up gradient from the coal pile where it used to be. Down deep, there was an aquifer that had enough pressure in it and deep enough that we could tap down into it, and just by the own pressure of the aquifer, bring that water, put a well down, bring the water naturally came up, and then we put it back into the ground where the contaminated with the low pH water was, to further flush that water out of the system there underneath. So without any moving parts, no pumps, we're able to tap into gravity, artesian wells, and use that water to flush that groundwater underneath the old coal pile out. And then where it emerged at the discharge point, further down gradient, we put two, I'll just call it two, we would call it reactive barriers, where we put pure calcium carbonate so that water would go over it and, of course, raise its pH so that it was an acceptable level before it hit waters of the state. So that, in a nutshell, was, I'm surprised that one didn't get an award, simply because, one, it's a twofer, and it was very innovative, and at the end of the day, it doesn't use hardly any power once we put it into place. And then finally, this is a good one that we were very proud of this year, and that's the Lower Three Runs Integrator Operable Unit. And that's the first integrator operable unit. It's a watershed here on Savannah Riverside. It's one of 6 that we have, that we keep track of. And it was the first to reach the final remedial decision for Savannah Riverside. And maybe a kind of a fuzzy picture here, but this is the watershed boundary. And so we're really talking about here on Savannah Riverside, just within the boundaries of Savannah Riverside. And right in the middle of there, you might make it, that's Parr Pond, then there's a Pond B out here. And in that watershed was 2 of our reactors, the P and R reactors. And remember, talked about all that river water that came up and we had to pump up to dissipate that heat? Well, that water had to go somewhere. And so through a canal and stream system where P and R were, it all made its way into Parr Pond and then finally down the Lower Three Run stream. So, how are we going to, and what happened during the years, there were some releases that got into that cooling water. So we had cesium-137, and I mentioned earlier it was in the sediments there at Parr Pond and a little bit in Pond B, but there were also some hot spots in some of the canal and the streams that fed into that. So again, this is a good example of the great teamwork that we have. We call it the core team process with EPA and DHEC with the site working together to come up with a realistic, viable solution that doesn't cost a lot of money and still gets the job done and does it efficiently. So this is a good example of that, because we came up with 3 remedies with how to take care of this, go into this final decision here. The first is, well, cesium-137 has a half-life of about 30 years. Okay, it's all going to go away. So eventually, so all we'll do, we're going to maintain our borders, and we're going to put we call land use controls, and just let it, we call it monitored natural attenuation, and we'll just post wherever the spots that we can identify some contamination, and that'll protect people or any other receptors that get near it. And the second thing we found there was one spot that was, that needed some extra, I guess we made the decision to remove about 20 to 30 yards, which is about 3 or 4 dump truck loads, that needed to come out of one of the R reactor discharge canals. So that was just a small piece that was going to be removed. And then third is that, this is where the river water comes into play, is that we would maintain the water level in Parr Pond. So if the water level there was going to drop, we have our river water system able to pump water all the way up into Parr Pond and keep that from happening. And we also do the same for, it's not in this watershed, but also for L Lake that's down here at the Steel Creek IOU as well. So the good news there is that we didn't have to dig up nearly 30 miles of stream and canals. We didn't have to spoil like 3,000 acres of aquatic habitat to clean this up. So we didn't have to insult the environment to clean it up. We came up with a no-nonsense, just reasonable solution on how that contamination is going to be taken care of for the future. So that's why those three, I think, are great examples, and it just doesn't require that much energy to implement. So those are 3 good examples of, I will call, green environmental remediation projects for us. And finally, let's see, last slide. Get it there. So to wrap up, we're still relying on our backbone to 70-year-old infrastructure. And it's still keeping the missions going at Savannah Riverside for the last 70 years and should for 70 plus. As long as we can keep on it, maintain our focus on improving it. And of course, this is another briefing if I went into risk and how we do come up with these categories of green and yellow and red. So our biggest, I guess, challenge is to keep the focus. And so when we come together as a site, to not lose sight of those 12 systems that we have, so that we can keep the priority and we can keep this Road to Green plan and going. And I mentioned earlier that you'll see that one picture on the first slide again. And this is a recent project where we were replacing the trash racks that, when you pull that river water in, guess what? It's got logs, it's got debris, bottle. You just can't imagine what floats down the Savannah Riverside. But we have to screen that stuff out. So this is a picture of maintaining our river water pump house there at 3G by reinstalling new trash racks. And with that, that concludes my brief. I'd be glad to entertain any questions.
All right, Candace, we'll start with you.
Candace CAB. So has your budget changed, where your budget for common infrastructure, has that changed much in the last 20 or 30 years?
I can only talk for the last 10. But it has gone up. We generally try to track it with inflation. And we try to also, this is like if that one commercial for that investment firm, I won't name its name, but as the programs do better, we like to say we'll do better, because if the programs are getting funded, then that, through indirect process, we get a little bit more money. We don't get as much proportionally, but as the site's program grows, then our infrastructure budget grows, which it should, because that means more users on site. More facilities are going up, they're using water, they're using power, and they've got workers that got to come in and use our roads too. So yes, it has gone up.
Thank you. I asked because I was kind of surprised when I saw how much was spent for the common infrastructure. It was much smaller than I would have thought for a place the size of SRS. So my other question is your common infrastructure budget comparable to other sites across the complex?
Boy, that's a good question. I really can't answer that. It's like comparing apples and oranges. I just throw out that like Hanford gets a direct appropriation for their infrastructure and utilities, whereas we don't. So and Oak Ridge is different too. Nobody's ever come up with a metric to kind of do that.
Okay.
I wish our headquarters would. That would be an interesting number to see.
And my final question is the Road to Green going to be a separate budget, or is that going to be like a as-needed special, if we have money left kind of deal?
Yes and no. We do take a number of the projects in our one-year plan, our 5-year plan and one-year plan. We don't want to throw together a plan that just sits on a shelf and hope for money. A good chunk of our plan is already within our base budget, and then things like roads or major roofs we have to kind of fight for it, so to speak, at the beginning of the year and throughout the year as dollars become available. So it's a little bit of both, actually.
Thank you.
Okay. Phyllis?
Phyllis Britt, CAB. I have 3 questions. The first one, the road that's shared with the county, how do y'all work out the paving, the repaving of that road? Who pays? Whose schedule does it get on?
The site would be responsible for that.
Okay, totally, financially and?
Total. I mean, right now, we'll ask the county, but I'm pretty sure they'll probably say that's your road.
Okay.
We're doing a study on it right now, what it would take to bring it up to complete DOT standards. And we'll definitely approach them with that question.
Okay.
I'm not optimistic.
All right. The second question is about the EV stations. You listed that as immediate. What creates the energy to provide EV stations?
The electricity grid, the grid itself.
And so where does that power come from?
It will come from, I had that one kind of showing where our power comes. It either comes from Dominion Energy or a third of it comes from the site, from our biomass plant.
Okay. So, but is that oil-based?
Oh, the third that comes from biomass plant is wood chips.
That's right, okay.
And Dominion Energy, they have a mix of,
Right.
I believe they still have at least two coal-fired plants in their generation portfolio, but they've got a large number of, they got a little bit of hydro, gas, primarily gas, up the road at Urquhart. I know that's a gas plant. So it's a mix. And they do a little hydro, gas. And they got a lot of solar, too, on their portfolio.
Oh, true, okay. Okay, and finally, to the solar question, do y'all really have a feel for when it will become cost-effective to do that?
Oh, I think it's cost-effective now.
Really?
Now, yeah, with the energy, with electricity price going up, it's...
Yeah, okay.
I mean, as long as solar panels and batteries don't price go up with it, then... But we are very much being incentivized to go clean energy, so yeah, we're doing it.
Okay, because I just read something as far as homeowners that solar panels on the roof are proving to be a detriment when you're trying to resell your house.
Yeah.
So.
But we plan on Savannah Riverside will be around for the next 25 years, I believe. I think I can say that. So we don't have to worry about reselling.
Right.
Because solar panels degrade over time. That's one of the big, you're going to lose I guess we model 3 or 4% each year.
Exactly.
So you got to plan for that, got to plan for disposal. So if you sell your house and it had a solar roof for the last 20 years, then it's going to be a liability for the new owner.
And where does SRS dispose of theirs?
We don't know yet. That's.
Oh, you haven't had them long enough.
Well, hopefully, I don't want to reveal any cards, but when we talk with Dominion Energy, we're going to have them take care of that.
Gotcha.
They'll send it to Yucca Mountain.
All right, so do you have any more, Phyllis?
I'm going to thank you.
I see you, Commander. I've actually got Kim had hers up first, so we're going to kick over here and then come back to you.
Kim Ray, CAB. I had a question about that Lower Three Runs watershed area. You said the area had some cesium contamination?
Yes.
And you all did, you said land use controls to keep personnel out of that area. Do you have any problems with wildlife being affected in that area? Or do you know if wildlife is affected? And how is the wildlife control that goes in and out of those areas?
Well, it's really not. But we do, that's one of the missions of Savannah River Ecology Lab that we have, to monitor that. Now, I'm not and plus any wildlife that, especially from deer, like from deer hunts, all those games are always sampled. But I'm not aware of any animals have been, I guess, unduly affected by the contamination there in that watershed.
I mean, how would we know? Do we have a way to know?
All we can do is sample and monitor.
I mean, what would we be looking for?
You're getting, that's beyond my expertise, actually. I'm sorry.
All right, thank you.
Not long ago, Brian Hennessy did a presentation on lower 3 runs that we can refer back to for that.
That's right.
And then we've got the ACER presentation that'll talk about some of the animal monitoring that we can look forward to in the next couple months.
Good question
So,
for that.
we've kind of gotten there. We're going to get the rest of the way there very soon. Narinder.
Narendra Malik, CAB. About 3-4 years ago, we submitted a recommendation to install solar panels.
Rooftop?
Pardon?
Rooftop solar? Rooftops?
Rooftop, yes.
Yes.
For the buildings which were being renovated. And at that time, I don't know who did the analysis, they said it's not feasible.
Well, anything's feasible, but it wouldn't have saved us any money at the time.
So are you redoing that again?
Well, a lot of that is being taken care of. We're supposed to adhere to new ash-free standards in which we have to look at net zero. So yes, we will, for any new facility, has to look at how it can become net zero, and of course, rooftop solar would be a high consideration.
Because at that time, DOE said they did not approve the recommendation. So basically, I feel that partially that recommendation is being implemented somehow.
Yeah, it's pretty much been mandated to us to do that. I mean, rooftop solar specifically, I can't say it says you got to do that, but you've got to take into account how are you going to make a new facility net zero where it pretty much sustains itself. So I don't see how you could not look at rooftop solar in that regard.
And we can maybe check after the meeting. One of the things I remember that was a key component of that response wasn't so much that the panels weren't worth it, but the buildings themselves, the existing buildings, didn't have the capability to hold up the weight of the panels on the roofs.
Thank you.
But we'll look at that response again.
Mm-hmm.
Charles.
Charles Hilton, CAB. I'm curious, when the plant was operating in the 80s, did y'all produce all of your energy from the coal-fired plant and whatever resources, or did you buy energy at that time?
Now, don't quote me. Let's see. I believe we still had to buy some. That D-area plant only produced like 40 megawatts. I'm not sure what our loads were back then. So I can't say for certain.
I'm just
a good chunk
curious.
of our electricity came from the D-area power plant, though.
Well, I knew that SE&G at the time was the backup
Yeah.
to y'all, but it just seems with the increasing cost y'all are getting, what's the other, and that's what you're looking at and talking about right now. It's just an interesting observation.
I remember that came up as part of the biomass presentation several years ago. We can go back and take a look at, I remember that question being asked and answered. It's in the record, so we can find it for sure. Any other questions or comments from around the table? Dave, you're free to go. Thank you so much, sir. All right, folks, we're in the home stretch now. We got a couple of recommendations that we need to talk about. These are drafts that were written and ready to go. Before we move on, do we need to take a very short break? Do we need 5 or 10 minutes, or are we good? We're good? Let's keep rocking and rolling then. So the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to talk about the L reactor historic preservation recommendation that Charles wrote. Charles, in just a minute, I'm going to ask you to go over this one for us and talk about it. And I think that one of the things that would probably be helpful would be that question at the committee meeting that you asked, right? Do you remember what started this whole thing for you? When you asked what reactor could we preserve? And there was an answer that you got, and I think that was really the genesis that led to this recommendation. So if you could, let's walk through that just a little bit and hit the recommendation. Go for it, sir.
The question he's referring to is, I'd asked several meetings back about preserving a reactor for legacy. And the talk was for a long time of preserving C reactor. There was actually a plan, I think, back year 2000, 2005, that mentioned that would be preserved. And then over a period of time, but nothing was done. The building deteriorated for lack of use. There's asbestos in it already. There's just a multitude of problems, mold. And at some point in time, it was taken off that preservation plan to preserve C reactor. Folks, we've got a legacy down here at Savannah River Site. It's one of the most remarkable engineering feats that's been done in a long time. And it bothers me that nothing is being preserved. We're tearing it down. We now have two opportunities to save something down there. CR and P reactors are out of the question. Two of them have been grouted. The other ones are full of mold. K reactor is out of the question because it's being used by NNSA and the plutonium downblending and whatever they do in NNSA. So we have L reactor left. We're hearing now that L reactor, we know that it's being used for fuel rod storage. All of these fuel rods coming in from all over the world, including the United States, are being stored there until they can be taken care of in H Canyon. We're getting a date of 34, 37 time frame that we'll be through with that program, and L reactor will then be potentially available unless there's a new mission to preserve it. I've always heard every time we're talking about preserving the history of SRS, too late. We're now, maybe 10 years before we'll be ready to close that building down. And what I'm asking for in this recommendation is starting the process now to make that a national historic site, preserve it, and figure out a way that we can let the public go to it and tour it and see what was accomplished at SRS. It has been done. Hanford's done it for years. They have B reactor open. I've been there. You can walk literally up to the reactor. You can sit in the control room. And for true nerds like me that love this stuff, I think we've got an opportunity right now to preserve some of the history of the Savannah River site. And I think we need to take action before 10 years from now and it's too late.
So, Heather, will you scroll down to the recommendation section for us? One of the things I want to point out about this one, because I think it's kind of interesting, is second line up from the bottom, he kind of put it in a timeline, but not really, right? It's once the facility has completed its mission. So it is an open-ended, when the department's done with it. Go ahead and start planning now, not to just walk away, but to do something different, make a preservation with it. I think it's important to point out that little line because he's not saying like, take a tour bus in there tomorrow. It's when you're done, when you're ready. So I think that's an important distinction to make, something that's important to highlight with this. With that, are there any questions, comments, concerns about this recommendation? I know you've all had a chance to read it. It's been sent on the email a couple times. We did this, discussed it at 2 committee meetings last month and have had some other discussions. AK, why don't you start it off for us?
Thank you. AK Hassan Cab. I support the recommendation. I was just wondering, Charles, if we might, I don't know, the group may not find it necessary, since it's going to DOE, but it's also a public document. But I was just wondering if you might be willing to add like a rationale statement, like 1 to 3 sentences or something, saying about the preserving of the L reactor up front. Because other than the title, you got to read everything and get down to the bottom to understand what the recommendation is. I'd like for that to be more prominently up front, at least in my mind. So
I'm open to whatever the SCAB approves. The thing that I would just like to see is that we make the direction that we want this done or would like to see this done over the wording is immaterial. We just need to make sure we know what we're asking for. And I was careful not to do a timeline on it. I know this is not easy. We have NNSA facilities all over that site. They're going to be concerned about traffic driving by tritium production or pit production. I understand all of that. But I think those things, we've got some brilliant minds at SRS, they can work through those. Whatever the board decides how better to word this, I'm comfortable.
So let me ask you like this. Do we, an actual wording, or is this just conceptually something that you want to see? Do you have a sentence, I guess, ready to go, AK?
Actually, I do not. You know, I have a great appreciation for the history that he's laid out. It's just that in laying out the history, the recommendation comes at the end. And if you didn't have the title, you wouldn't really know what he's trying to get to. I'd just like to have that point up front.
Okay.
And then all the other stuff following, along with the recommendation at the end.
Yes, Charles.
Okay, and what I did here, this is a traditional format for these things.
Right.
We lay out the background, the discussion of it, and then we proceed to the options and the final recommendation. There's nothing sacred about this layout. It's just a traditional way that we've done them.
What I would suggest, let's look at it like this. If there's maybe room for us to add another sentence to the beginning rather than trying to wordsmith it here, would the two of y'all want to hang out for about 5 minutes afterwards and add a sentence to the beginning? You okay with that, Charles? How about you, okay? Is the group okay with them doing that conceptually? Sure. I mean, we can understand what they're wanting to do. Okay. Jerry, you put your card up briefly.
Well, I was just going to say, I think all you have to do is just put planning to preserve the L reactor facility as a National Historical Site, and that solves the issue that AK has.
So see, Jerry's volunteered to hang out for another 5 minutes after, and we'll get that knocked out. Any other questions, comments, concerns around the table for this one? Someone ask y'all the same thing I asked before we move on every single time. Does everybody know how they want to vote tomorrow? You have a pretty good idea how you feel about it? Okay. Are we ready to move on? Let's do it to it. If we'll drop this one down and pick up the plutonium recommendation. All right. Jim,
Okay.
you wordsmith this one to death.
All right, yeah, this one's been around for a bit. The history here is really kind of important. It predates even the 2002 date. It all began with the agreement between the United States and Russia for limiting the amount of plutonium and rendering the excess safe and harmless. With that, South Carolina passed legislation that required DOE to remove excess plutonium, was collecting excess plutonium to be converted in the MOX facility. You may all remember that one. That was a large production facility that didn't happen. That was canceled in 2018. The result of that was the DOE became liable for stipulated damages that were part of the 2002 agreement. Those damages were $1 million a day up to $100 million a year. and the delinquency was 6 years. So therefore, that's how the $600 million payment was defined and enforced. I'm sure you all kind of remember that, especially the lawyers who got 100 million of it right off the top. The agreement was renegotiated, and because of the failure of the MOX facility, and that agreement pushed out the date to 2037 for removal of, at that time, 9.5 metric tons of surplus plutonium. And that's kind of where we stand today. Of interest is that NNSA in 2019 contributed through a decision of capital to build the 3 additional globe boxes that you've heard about, support systems, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And if that's not accomplished by the 2037 date, the stipulated penalties go back into effect. So there'd be a substantial financial commitment. It's not a determined number, it's going to be a percentage dependent on how much plutonium was actually removed from Savannah River site from the state of South Carolina. So, considering the consequences of not acting or not acting sufficiently, the recommendation basically is asking that the DOE provide or recognize that they need to support and prioritize the requirement to meet the requirement of 9.5 metric tons removed from the state.
All
And
right.
that's it.
Questions, comments, concerns from around the table? Oh, Jim did write it that perfectly. Come on. No? No questions for Jim? Not even from you, Charles? I don't mean to call you out by name, I just can always count on a little something. No? Okay. All right. Everybody know how
I
they feel?
have something. I'm just kidding.
Yes, I love it.
No, when I was reading the title, it's just a nitpicky thing. Can we just spell out plutonium?
In every possible way.
In the title.
Yep.
And then at the bottom in the recommendation, I feel like the title gives me a sense of urgency, but the recommendation didn't. And I don't know if it was just me. But the title was like, yes, hurry up, do it as quickly as possible. And then the recommendation just kind of sounds like continue to support, make sure you give sufficient support. So I don't know, maybe there's just a word choice thing, I'm not sure. But I do support this recommendation. I feel like this is a very important thing for the state of South Carolina and all the stakeholders involved in this.
Who else agrees with Candace that a word needs to be inserted that implies a greater deal of haste? Does he stand alone? Kim, you agree? Yeah, Kim agrees. So is there another word that we can suggest that we can throw in here?
If you wanted to, we could certainly call this plutonium processing deadline.
I think she was talking about down here at the bottom. She'd like to see, yeah, not the title itself. She just wants us to spell out plutonium in the title. But down here in the bottom, I think she was saying in the actual recommendation section.
And maybe we can just reflect the word accelerate again, I don't know. But I just feel like the title gave me a greater sense of urgency than the actual recommendation part.
James, how about just putting DOE give high priority
Yeah.
in support?
High priority.
Is that enough
Does that
urgency?
carry it?
Yeah, I'm fine.
Candace feels the speed now. What else? What else do we have from around the table? We good to go? You know how we're going to do tomorrow? Pretty much know how you're going to vote? Phyllis, yeah.
I have a curiosity question. Do you think that South Carolina would rather they actually do this, or would they rather get $600 million again? I mean, seriously.
They're politicians, so.
Yeah, exactly. So would they give priority to this? I mean, I realize they're not in charge of that. but-
Even if they didn't, they have no direct control over it.
True.
So they're
And I guess
they're
from
an
the standpoint-
observer, not a player.
I guess from the standpoint of saving DOE money, which saves all of us money ultimately, it is a priority. Yeah, but I'm just curious. It'll be interesting to see if I'm still alive when, when this comes to be.
All right.
If you are, you can go on the tour of the reactor.
All right. Any other questions, comments, concerns? Do we know how we're going to vote tomorrow? Charles, are you rewriting this one? Or are y'all working on another one? Okay. So are there any remaining questions about this one? So while they work on this, and since y'all have anything else, I want to do something I don't ever do, and it's call out a member who has come in a little bit late. DeAndre had a heck of a day today, and y'all are going to read about it in the paper, and I'm not going to spoil it for you, but I'm going to tell y'all that after y'all read the article in the paper, y'all are all going to go and congratulate Andre for coming here anyway today. So DeAndre, thank you for showing up. Much appreciated. Thank you. Believe me, not the worst day in the world today, but like it's up there.
Can I just make a comment on that? DeAndre, I did get a message from Mike Budney, whose flight got turned around because he couldn't land in Augusta. And the text said, tell DeAndre he owes me.
I got it.
He came anyway. The debt is paid. What did y'all add? What did y'all add? Oh, you haven't typed it yet? Was it on this one or is it on the other one? On the other one? All right, since they've got the wording, do we want to come back? Actually, everybody trusts y'all anyway, so we don't have to come back around to that. Any other, well, I mean, you know, the group kind of gave us a nod and said that they're okay with what y'all do. Any last questions, comments, concerns before we talk about wrapping up for today? Greg, do you have anything that you want to add? Any parting words? Okay. Oh, we didn't do public comment. I skipped an entire thing. Now, no one signed up for public comment, but we're going to ask anyway. Is there anybody who would like to make a public comment that did not sign up? Going once, going twice, and sold.
Yes. Did we, what's the meeting schedule for A&O?
It'll be in about
4:15.
10 minutes after this.
Okay, so we got a lot of stuff going on in A&O, so hopefully y'all can make it. Otherwise, I'm going to recess this. Is that what you'd like me to do?
Yeah, I would enjoy that very much.
All right, folks, I will see y'all hopefully in just a little while, if not tomorrow. We're recessed.
Gathering time starts tomorrow at 8:30 a.m. Meeting comes to order at 9. Thank you, folks.
Good work, Jim. Hey, almost.